This is a presentation of the 19th Annual Colorado Snow and Avalanche Workshop, a program of the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, Friends of CAIC, and the National Avalanche Center, presented by Dimuth and Pomoka.
Good morning, CSAWs, and welcome to the third and final day of the 19th Annual Colorado Snow and Avalanche Workshop. Thank you so much for joining us again today. It's been a long couple of days, but a tremendous amount of content, and I think really good content, and really amazing discussions. It's really been fun to see everybody participate. So thank you for hanging with us. I hope it's been worth it. I think there's some really interesting talks that we have today. Certainly enjoyed seeing the pre-recorded talks and looking forward to the discussions that we have. We have two sessions today. The first one is on risk communication and decision making, and the second one is on avalanche accidents. So a little bit of a different flavor today, but I guess each day has been a little different. So for our first, I guess just a little bit of bookkeeping. Remember, this is your chance to interact with these speakers and to ask them questions. And we really encourage you to do that. I think you've seen over the last couple of days that's been a tremendous aspect of the format that we're trying to pull off. So you can raise your hand at the bottom of the screen, and we will tell the moderators that there's a live question from the audience. Turn on your microphone and you can ask your question. We really encourage you to do that because, again, it's a chance for you to ask these questions directly and interact with the speaker, which is something that we don't always get to do. So please take advantage of that. If you would rather just type in your question, you can do that into the question and answer box, which again is at the bottom of your screen. And we will funnel those questions to the moderators. We have been getting more questions than we've had time for, which is great. So please keep asking questions. And we are trying to funnel the leftover or overflow questions, I guess, to the speakers. And we'll try to get them to answer the questions in the Q&A section there. But if for some reason that's not working, we'll figure out other ways to get it to them. So if we get towards the end of a session and you had your hand up and you didn't get to ask your question, just type it into the Q&A and we'll get you an answer. The live session from yesterday, the recording of that is up on the website. So the website has all of the pre-recorded talks and now the recordings of day 1 and day 2. We will put day 3 up there probably today or certainly by early next week. And then those will be up for at least a month. I do want to thank our sponsors, Dimuth and Pomoka. We'll have a talk from Dimuth, another tech talk in the middle of the day. We're also going to have a talk from the American Avalanche Association about some of the work that they're doing. So that's another great addition today. And I want to thank the U.S. Forest Service National Avalanche Center, who's a big partner and a huge part of the motivation and execution of CSAW. So thanks to everybody who's contributed. And we'll go through some special thank yous towards the end. But without further ado, I want to move on to today's content. So I'm going to introduce the moderators for the first session, which again is on risk communication and decision making. This is going to be moderated by Simon Troutman and Ann Sinclair. Simon is originally from Wyoming and spent a little bit of time in the Navy before going to the college at Western Washington University and eventually Montana State University. He did work at MSU on wet snow and has been a forecaster at Moonlight Basin, the Colorado Avalanche Information Center here, and the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, where he was eventually the director. He's now at the National Avalanche Center and has been working very closely with the Northwest Avalanche Center and also coordination work for all of the Avalanche centers in the United States. Ann Sinclair has over a decade of experience working in the field, much of that in Colorado as a backcountry ski guide and avalanche forecaster. She attended the University of Notre Dame in studying anthropology, and Simon Fraser University, where she did a master's degree. She's currently working on her PhD at Simon Fraser University and is also a forecaster at Avalanche Canada. So welcome, Simon and Anne. Thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ethan. Appreciate it. Take it away, Anne.
Thank you. Good morning, and it's great to be here on day 3 of what has been a fantastic event. So thanks to all the folks behind the scenes and to all of you tuning in at home. It's an honor for me to start by introducing Dr. Julie Dimuth. Julie is a research scientist at NCAR in the Mesoscale and Microscale Meteorology Lab with the Weather Risks and Decisions in Society Research Group. Her research focuses on weather risk communication, risk perception, and decision-making for both experts and members of the public. And she holds a bachelor's and master's degree in atmospheric sciences and a PhD in communication. I'm personally a big follower of Julie's work on mental models and hazard experiences. So I'm very excited for this opportunity to speak more in depth with Julie today about her research. So over to you, Julie.
Okay, wonderful. First of all, can you hear me, Anne?
You're
Audio
good.
is good. Okay, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. In return, I'm a huge fan of Anne's work on mental models of avalanche risk. So this is fun for me today. Let me see here. Get this. Share my screen. All right. So, can you let me swap this? Can everybody see that?
Looks great.
Okay, wonderful. So I have to admit, I'm a little bit nervous about this because I really don't have expertise in avalanches. I was really honored though when Ethan and Jason reached out to me and asked me to talk about some of the risk communication work that is going on in a parallel field, so the field of meteorology. I've seen some of the presentations over the last couple of days. I don't have any really cool Abby pictures or snow pictures. I do have cool tornado pictures and tornado damage pictures though. So I'm looking forward to being able to share some of the work that I and my colleagues do in a related field, just to illustrate how we think about and approach risk communication perceptions and responses. So you can see the wonderful team of collaborators that have been working on this project I'm going to talk about today, which focuses on probabilistic tornado warnings. And just to dive into this, a framework that we use to think about doing this kind of work is that if we're ultimately really interested in people's risk perceptions and their responses, we actually have to study that in conjunction with the risk messages. And that's a way that we work toward developing more effective risk information, developing new information or refining the information that we have available. And another piece of this, we can do this with weather forecast messages like tornado warnings that currently exist, but also with new information that is in the pipeline or actively being researched to be operationalized. And one example, the example I'm going to talk about today is tornado warnings, which are currently deterministic or binary. You're either in or out of the warning. But there is this push, and additional research is helping us in a more nuanced way quantify those probabilities of tornado occurrence inside of a polygon. And so this is the future, something that might be operationalized. And so our goal is to understand, how do people think about, interpret, and respond to this information? And what can we understand to help us improve that information before it gets operationalized? And we chose to do this. There's been a lot of work that's been done with experiments, but we wanted to actually conduct interviews with people so that we could really deeply understand how and why they're thinking in the ways that they do. And so the way that we did this was by designing a few different tornado warnings. We have a deterministic warning, which is the one that's there on the left. So that is the state of the art right now. We also had a red color probabilistic warning, and the colors are a little hard to see, but the light pink represents 10%, and then the darker colors go from 10 to 30, 50, 70 to 90. And then we also designed a numeric probabilistic condition where we convey the information just using text without sort of the geospatial reference to see how people might respond to getting the information in that way. And then we asked a number of questions, of course, but really focusing on this idea of risk perception and responses We asked how people perceive the likelihood of a tornado occurring, but also how much damage can be caused, which is actually not something that's conveyed as part of the warning. And that's what we wanted to see if people conflated the two. And then also what kind of response behaviors they would engage in. So even though I said we did this as interviews to really deeply understand what people were thinking and why, we also had a quantitative measure. We had the Marcus scale, and that's actually what I wanted to focus on today, just because it's a lot easier than trying to convey a bunch of quotes. And what this plot is showing on the y-axis is how people marked a scale to say what they thought the perceived likelihood of a tornado occurring would be. And the x-axis is showing the different locations that we tested, that we placed people at. And then of course we had the mean perceived likelihood for the deterministic, the red color, and the numeric condition. And just quickly, some of the results that we're seeing are that that numeric textual condition, people's mean perceived likelihood of a tornado occurring, is really the closest to what we explicitly tell them. So it's closest to that probability that we give. In the red color condition, we saw that people were systematically overestimating the tornado likelihood. So even when we're telling them what the probability is, they actually are saying that it's higher than what we're explicitly conveying. And then we saw in the deterministic condition that even if we're not explicitly telling people what the uncertainty is, that they're inferring uncertainty into that deterministic polygon. And they actually have a distribution that they're inferring highest in the middle of the polygon and lower toward the edges. So these are just a couple of the results, and some of the additional results that really came out of that qualitative work is we see that people are really reasoning in very complex and arguably sophisticated ways. And in doing so, they're drawing on their beliefs, their past experiences, their knowledge about tornadoes and about storm motion. They're thinking about, even though they don't use the words limited predictability, but functionally what is the limited predictability of these types of extreme events, and also even a little bit of the broader threat context. We did see, and I didn't have a chance to show these results though, that most people aren't conflating the information that conveys likelihood as also conveying severity. So they understand that that's not what is being conveyed. And then we also see that people are really using the information to respond in different ways. And some are taking that, maybe ultimate ideal protective action, which here in this context is of course taking shelter. But others, even if they're not doing that, they are information seeking and information sharing, which is a key piece of the process that people go through when they're managing a risk. And so I just wanted to conclude by saying, you really don't know how people are going to interpret and use risk information until you empirically evaluate it. That's an absolute tenet of risk communication research, and something I think probably applies in this context, the Avalanche context as well. So with that, I'll stop. And really excited for what kinds of questions people have.
We are too. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. And your presentation offers such a thought-provoking context for comparison. And I think we're all thinking through how your results apply to our own avalanche risk communication context. But maybe we could start by comparing those contexts in terms of differences in the hazard and the forecasting process, and also the end users as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that Anne and Simon and I had just a fantastic conversation about this the other day. I wish we could have recorded it. So I think that there are some similarities in terms of the hazard and the forecast process. It seems to me like both avalanches and tornadoes are very spatially localized types of hazards, right? And they have predictability challenges. It occurred to me after we talked, Anne and Simon, that really similar in tornadoes as avalanches is that you can know that all the conditions are right, that you have all the ingredients in place for these hazards to occur, but yet you still might not have one occur. And you need to warn people though about that possibility. And so that's a similarity, I think, between the two that makes it an interesting kind of risk messaging, risk communication challenge. I was thinking a little bit about the severity piece because this has come up a couple of times. And absolutely in the tornado context, there is limited sort of a capacity to understand what the severity of a tornado is going to be ahead of time. That's not 100% true because the Storm Prediction Center, which is the national center that issues outlooks up to 8 days in advance and tornado watches, they do have certain risk categories, the higher ones that suggests that the conditions are ripe for stronger tornadoes, EF2 or stronger, multiple tornadoes or long track tornadoes. But even still, they can know that those conditions are right for that and still not have those kinds of events. And so I don't know, I think there's some similarity there, I think, with the avalanche risk as well. I think another thing that we were talking about as far as the users go, though, is some big differences. I mean, with avalanches, it seems as though people are voluntarily, this is a word that we were talking about the other day, and like voluntarily going into the backcountry. And so it's a voluntary sort of exposure for them versus an involuntary exposure for people in most cases, unless you're a storm chaser, involuntary exposure in the tornado context. I'm not going to take credit for this. This was really Anne's great idea, is that, in a tornado context, people are fixed and the tornado is moving over them. So it's more Lagrangian in that way. Whereas in the avalanche context, it's the people who are moving and the risk is more fixed. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. And then I think another key piece, and then I'll stop talking and see what other thoughts people have, is with the avalanche risk context, we were talking about how there are these sort of intrinsic goals and motivations that are what send people into the backcountry, that really put them in this exposure place, that I think can also affect how they perceive the risk and, maybe what their willingness is or isn't to manage it in different ways. That is different from the tornado context, where people don't necessarily, again, unless you're a storm chaser, have kind of goals to sort of be in a tornado. So there's a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences too.
Thanks, Julie. That was really good. We have a question from Blaze Reardon, and I think you touched on some of this, but I think everybody in the audience, or everybody that thinks about avalanche risk communication, public avalanche risk communication, is probably still chewing on some of this. So Blaze says, you report that your survey respondents did not confuse likelihood and severity, which is good since the warnings exclusively describe likelihood. However, the North American Avalanche Danger Scale combines both likelihood and severity as size. And you talked about this a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you think that may affect people's perceptions and responses of risk by adding both things to the scale, or having a scale that uses both?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I feel like I should have a clear answer for this. And I'll, the punchline is I really don't. I think, well, I will say that part of the reason we separated it out in our study is, again, because there's such limited ability to know the severity of a tornado ahead of time, other than kind of in broad strokes. And again, maybe that's somewhat similar in the avalanche community. So when a tornado occurs, they don't actually generally know what the intensity was until they go in afterward and do a damage assessment. Some cutting edge research is starting to advance that a little bit, or push those boundaries a little, to be able to communicate severity. I think the biggest challenge with combining the two, and I don't know all the background behind why the two got combined in the avalanche danger rating scale. But the biggest challenge, of course, is if you have a low probability event, but it could be really high severity. And so if people think that the chance is low, and so they make that decision to go into the backcountry, but if an avalanche does occur, it could be a really bad one, then they might not be recognizing that aspect of the risk. And so I think that's the biggest, I guess, reason for me to think that it could be somewhat useful to separate the two and to communicate them separately, but without knowing all the details about how avalanche risk is characterized and what all goes into assessing it and establishing what the danger rating scale is. It could be that it's too hard to separate these two important factors, which is why they get combined. I'd actually love to hear from other people to know what you think, since again, you're the experts of it. But I would say the main risk, no pun intended, is that if people interpret that low probability, if you have a situation where you have a low probability, high impact event, and people don't realize, and they think low means that they're good to go out there and they aren't going to experience anything too bad, but in fact, they really could.
Thank you. That's a great answer. What do you think, Anne? Should we take a live question?
Yes, we've got a couple of people on the line. So maybe let's start with Ian Hoyer. Ian, are you still there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Well, thanks, Julie. That was a super interesting talk. I was wondering, it looked like your shading by percentages, it worked. People understood the percentages when you were doing it using that method. But I was wondering, did you have a different desired response based on the percentages? And do you have any idea of if people were doing what you wanted? Obviously understanding's great, but we want the action.
Yes, thank you, Ian. I love this question so much because it also touches on something that Ann and Simon and I talked about the other day, which is, I think a lot of times there is sort of an assumption that we know what we want people to do. And asking these kinds of things and doing these kinds of studies reveals how maybe we have different behaviors that we think are still good or effective behaviors. I would say that most meteorologists in particular really think that the ideal behavior, what we want them to do, is to take shelter, because we know that this type of threat can kill people, of course. Even if it's a weak tornado, it can kill people. So that's sort of the ultimate desired response. That being said, I, as somebody who also understands and appreciates the threat itself, but who also thinks about the goal of risk communication and designing effective risk messages, is, for me, that goal is a little bit more kind of earlier in the process, which is that I just want people to actually understand that there's a risk and understand what that risk is comprised of. And then they can use that information to make whatever decision they think is best for them. So you saw in the responses that I showed in the talk at the 10% probability locations that some people were taking shelter, but some people were information seeking and information sharing. And in my view, that is absolutely a valid response, because it's often the antecedent to then lead you to take shelter. So that's not directly answering your question, but I would say, all of those range of behavioral responses are, whether it's information or protective responses, are all valid responses in my view. But that's not necessarily shared by other people. Other people might want them to automatically take protective action by seeking shelter. So there's variability there for sure.
I think that point is so interesting, Julie, because it in some ways it's so patently obvious, but it really gets back to having to set boundary conditions before you do research or try and answer questions, or you end up in the terrible spiral of talking. You can't assess the efficacy of your question if people are looking for different results, and
Yeah.
In terms of what success is. So
Exactly.
Thanks for that.
I also think, I just want to add one more thing, which is that I think that I'm not going to say this very clearly, but that we sort of have like these certain expectations of people, that they'll do certain things in certain ways. And by doing this kind of research, you realize that there is a range of behaviors. This is true for all of us. I mean, COVID is revealing this very, blatantly right now, that there are certain things that certain people want you to do, but maybe there's really good reasons why you don't do that, or how you're making choices about what you're doing. And so there isn't, I think kind of the punchline is, often there isn't one single action that's right or wrong, that we have to make space for knowing that when people are taking other actions, that's perfectly valid too.
Absolutely. We have another live question from Mark Staples. Mark, are you still around?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Julie?
Yes, I can, Mark.
So this is great. This kind of goes into the information seeking and taking action. I'm wondering if you could maybe kind of comment on how some of the other things I've read from other research from the National Weather Service on tornadoes gets into the number of warning signals that people get. So for instance, they see some of these products, but then maybe another one could be they look out the window and they see dark gray skies, and then they see their neighbor taking some action. And it sounds like it takes, I don't remember what the numbers were, 5 to 7 of those before they'll take some action. And I think it's analogous to avalanches, because we might put out some message in the morning, some warning signal, maybe an official avalanche warning, but then ideally they get to the trailhead and they talk to someone who says, oh yeah, did you hear the avalanche warning? And maybe on the drive to the trailhead, they heard something and because these get outside of our formal products, but they hear something from the local radio station that sort of repeats it, and so the accumulation of those drive them to take whatever, we can argue what action we want them to take. So I was wondering if you could just kind of comment on how some of that other research blends in with yours, the number of warning signals that people need to take action.
Yes, absolutely. Great question, Mark. There's a couple of answers to this. Absolutely, you're right that, and we have a lot of work that looks at what kind of risk information do people access, either they pull or gets pushed to them, and then how does that shape their risk perception? So in my slides, I really kind of focused in, and I just talked about formal risk messages, right? So warnings that were coming out or any other kind of watches or outlooks. But in reality, there's sort of a bigger frame that you can put risk messages into, which is risk information. And what you were talking about, people looking outside, those are environmental cues, or people turning and talking to somebody, those are social cues. And all of that kind of information is really represents the suite of risk information that people are accessing. Again, whether it's pushed or pulled to them. And we know that all of that information, so those different pieces, environmental cues, social cues, all that kind of stuff, are what help people further interpret the formal risk messages and decide whether they're really at risk. So it's absolutely key. And in fact, some of the work that we've been doing in tornadoes, actually trying to look at like Twitter data, but also doing post-event interviews where we've gone into the field and talked to people after tornadoes have affected them. We really see how key those environmental and social cues really are, as much, if not more so, than the formal risk information that they get. So, and I think one of the reasons for this is because, and I think this is another similarity between tornadoes and avalanches, is that they're really spatially localized risks, right, or hazards. And so you can be in a tornado warning and there can be a tornado, but you might not be affected at all. You could still, maybe you're, 2 or 3 or 4 miles away and you really aren't affected. So that's part of the reason that people go outside, or they look to see what other people are doing, because they're really trying to personalize whether they themselves are at risk and need to do something. Another thing that we haven't touched on, and I don't really know how relevant this is in the Avi community, but broadcast meteorologists are huge for the tornado context. So a lot of times people will get a warning maybe on their phone and then they'll turn on their local broadcaster. They have a trusted relationship with them. And you'll hear people who will say, especially in really tornado prone areas, that their broadcaster is tracking the radar and saying, if you're in this town, or if you're on this side of town, you really need to be paying attention now. So it's not just the formal warning, but it's also all these other pieces of information that come along with it. And the final thing I was going to say about this that I think is relevant for tornadoes, and probably also in some ways for avalanche risk, is that the risk evolves. So it's not the same 10 minutes later as it was 10 minutes ago. And I think probably for avalanche risk, maybe it evolves throughout the day as you get different heating or winds. But so people need to be able to get updated information when they're trying to really assess whether they're at risk later on. It's really complex. It really is. Good question.
Julie, we're getting quite a few questions into the chat box, and several of these are related to the implications of your findings on the information presentation. So you tested these 3 presentations, deterministic, probabilistic, and numeric. And we have some questions from Zach Guy, Frank Carew, in terms of what are the implications of those findings for what we should consider moving forward?
I should have expected this question. I would say the short answer is we don't know yet. It's one of these kind of classic risk or research responses, but I actually think it's really true. And I think that in this case, we do need to do quite a bit more work before we actually tell the Weather Service how this information should be presented and operationalized, because the ramifications are so big that I don't think that we can get this wrong. So I think we need more work with additional populations, additional types of tornado threats. We just gave people one hypothetical scenario that almost represented a classic supercell type of tornado threat situation, which of course is not representative of all of them. So, how are people going to look at this at night? And is there, a difference in how they're going to make sense of the information, or if they have fewer environmental cues, how do they how do they interpret if it's more of a linear type of system? So I think that we need more research. The one thing I would say though is, I think two things that we're seeing coming out of this. It's not clear that there's any disadvantage, strong disadvantage to the deterministic warning. I mean, of course, we see that people know the probabilities better if we tell them the probabilities, although they're still overestimating them. But they still understand that the risk is high. And so I think this also gets into some details I don't want to spend too much time talking about like, you know, how accurate those underlying probabilities are, because this is part of this active ongoing work in the communities. We're characterizing these probability distributions, but now we also need to do the work of saying, you know, whether they're skillful and verify them. So it's not clear that the deterministic warnings really have a major disadvantage. I think the other thing though that we're starting to see between the two probabilistic, well, between the numeric text condition versus the other two, is that people like the spatial reference. So they talked about this as a disadvantage when they were just looking at that text. If they don't know where those cities are, then it's hard for them to make sense of where the threat is. And then they have to kind of, you know, even if they do, they have to come up with a mental map and then think about where the tornado might be moving. And that's a lot more cognitive processing to go on than if you give them that spatial frame, which of course they're used to because they can pull up their radar, they can turn on their broadcasters. So I think having that sort of map-based type of information is something that we're seeing is quite useful. So there's a couple of things that we're seeing that we're learning from the information presentation, but I still don't think that we know exactly what's perfect yet.
Great. What do you think, Simon? Should we take another live call? It looks like
let's.
Alex,
there's so many questions coming in. Should we try? Did you just say a name?
Yeah, let's.
Awesome.
Alex is still on the line.
Yeah. Hey, Julie, thanks a lot for this discussion. It's one of our biggest challenges, communicating risk, I think. And I just wanted to, I guess, steal Zach Guy's question here and focus a little bit on the Avalanche community of seeing that how people connect better with numeric probabilities. And this is kind of directed at the moderators and maybe some other folks out there. Do you see any potential opportunities with the Avalanche forecast platform to implement numeric probabilities? And I think as highlighted earlier, one of the challenges there is that we combine likelihood and severity. So I think we'd have to start by splitting those out. But could you elaborate a little more on that, maybe?
So Alex, I'm not sure if this is a question really for me or for Anne and Simon.
Maybe Anne or Simon, if they have any thoughts on that, or any other folks that want to chime in, but kind of.
I have a question. I'm curious. So I'm reading that question from Zach and from you now, Alex. Julie, is it true that you found that people connect better with numeric probabilities? Or did you find that they're assigning probabilities no matter what you give them?
Definitely the latter. So yeah, Zach, I'm not sure if when you say connect better, what you're referring to. I think that, yeah, we did find that if we give them the numeric probability, then they are closer to being able to report what they think the probability is, compared to if we just gave them the deterministic. In that case, they have to infer a probability distribution. Again, the issue here, and this is relatively important, is, you know, this is just a hypothetical warning, a hypothetical probability distribution. So arguably, we can't really say that the people who got the deterministic warning condition and they told us what they thought the probability was, that they were right or wrong, because it's just a hypothetical situation. We don't know what the true underlying probability distribution is. And so this is going to be one of the things that I think is going to be really tricky is moving in the future. Even if we can start to truly skillfully quantify those probability distributions, they're going to vary from storm to storm to storm. And so for people to understand that, I think that's why there's some advantage to being able to tell people what that information is. But we can't necessarily say that in the deterministic condition that they're wrong, because wrong compared to this hypothetical situation that we had them evaluate. So yeah, they understand it better if we tell them what it is, but then they are layering in all these other pieces and then responding to the information in different ways.
So is it fair to say that regardless if you give them a simple message or a more nuanced message, they're still filtering that message with with their own perceptions and background and experience.
Absolutely. And I think maybe this also goes to Alex's question in some respects, is if you're giving people probabilities, those probabilities need to be reliable. They need to be accurate. And this is, part of the challenge, I think, that we're faced with, as again, the weather community is starting to be able to do this, but it's still a big kind of research space that they're working toward. And so I think the question that is relevant for the Avalanche community is, if you want to convey numeric probabilities, can you scientifically and skillfully do that? Or in certain situations, can you do that? And are they accurate? Are they verified probabilities?
This is a very interesting question. We have 2 minutes to wrap it up. Should we take one more live question from Florian? Florian, you gotta get in here and get it done.
All right, great. Thanks for this opportunity. My question is actually very related to your last question, except for that I'm not asking for numerical probabilities or something like that, but I'm also kind of targeting the likelihood and severity issue. So the bulletin provides the danger rating that combines the two of them, right? But it also provides individual information like the likelihood of avalanches occurring or the severity, but packaged into spatial distribution or in the potential avalanche size. So from Anne's work, we learned that there are user groups and many people out there that don't use the likelihood and the severity information from the avalanche bulletin, but from the presentation of Julie's work now, and Julie, please correct me if I got this wrong, I understand that people do not conflate likelihood and severity in general. So I'm asking whether it would be good to provide this nuanced difference between likelihood and severity, not only in those detailed, complex forms of likelihood of avalanches occurring, spatial distribution and size, but in plain words for the A, B, C user typologies, saying today we have this, in plain words, we have this low probability but high consequence event, and actually conveying that in the bulletin. So
I think I'll try to give a really quick response to this. So Florian, we found in our work that people weren't conflating the two. I think this could be somewhat their familiarity with the hazard and the hazard context. People told us, we know that you can't know how strong a tornado is until after the fact. So they are bringing their contextual knowledge to bear. Generally, there is concern from the risk and judgment decision-making community that if you have probability, that people will conflate it as also saying something about severity. So I think really investigating this in this avalanche context is probably really key. And I actually don't know if you were able to do some of that in your work, or in some ways this kind of points to Pascal's talk a little bit. So I think maybe it'll be kind of a nice segue, because I don't necessarily know that we have the answer yet, I think is sort of my punchline from what I understand.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. That was really good. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. And I'm happy to take other questions offline. Really would love to have more conversation about this. Very interesting.
All right. Awesome.
Thanks.
That sounds good. Let's see. Our next speaker is Pascal Hegley. And hey, Pascal. Pascal is an assistant professor at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, BC, where he manages a team of graduate students with whom he conducts applied avalanche research at the interface between the natural and social sciences. Pascal does great service to our community. We're super lucky to have him. And take it away, Pascal. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Simon, for the introduction. And yeah, very excited to be here and to get the opportunity to talk to the folks here. Let me just bring up my screen here and get organized. Yeah, I think it's actually great to come right after Julie's talk, because I think there's really a lot of parallels here.
Pascal, we've still got your notes up.
Oh, sorry. Let's try this again. still? Or do you get the slides now?
For me, it's here we are. We're good. We're good. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll use my 3 minutes right now to, instead of summarizing sort of the research results of the studies that I presented in the videos, I'm gonna focus more on sort of taking a step back and looking a little bit at the big picture and sort of highlight some of the emerging themes that come out of these studies in general. As we all know and just discussed, the job of the bulletin is really to summarize the information about the current conditions in a way that recreationalists can make informed choices about where they want to go in the backcountry. A lot of research in our community is going into creating better forecasts, but similar to what Julie presented, the focus of our research is really on better understanding what the end users actually do with this information. Now, the big challenge for avalanche forecasts is that our audience is very diverse with a lot of different backgrounds, objectives, and skills for putting these pieces of information together and coming up with some decisions. So I think we need to realize that there's many different ways that our forecast products can actually be used. Now, the two studies that I talk about in my video are part of a bigger series of social science studies that examine how recreationalists use, understand, and apply our products. And to build meaningful foundation for future improvements, we organized our research in 3 different phases. And the first one was kind of exploring the user landscape in general and establishing a meaningful framework. And that's where Anne's research was. And then the next step was to sort of identify challenges that people have. And the last one is explicitly testing interventions that can target these challenges. So Abby's work aims to identify challenges with the danger scale. And then Katie's study examines whether different presentation formats can actually make it easier for people to use some of the information that we produce. And we can get into those details during the Q&A. There's some sort of overarching take-home messages that I want to just highlight here before we get into our discussion. One of the challenges is really that there's no single right way of using avalanche forecasts. There's a considerable range of how people do this, and they're completely legitimate. Another main message that I want to convey is that how information is presented really matters, and this is not really a big surprise, but I think it's important for us to remember who uses the different parts of the bulletin and whether those parts are designed in a way that really sets these users up for success. So the danger rating, for example, really needs to work for the lower end user who relies on that communication tool the most. Another general observation that we've had from our surveys is that people really like these exercises that we have come up with. And this is relevant because our studies show that it's actually quite hard for people to put the different pieces of information together and come up with an overall assessment or decision. And so they really seem hungry for training opportunities that tell them whether they get things right. Now, the chances of avalanche courses to provide these opportunities are somewhat limited because people only take 1 or 2 courses in their backcountry careers, but they interact with the bulletin every time they plan a trip. And so we're wondering whether integrating interactive exercises in forecast website could be one way for providing these training opportunities in places where people naturally come to, so that we basically make this interaction as easy as possible for people. So I hope this is a meaningful start for our Q&A, and I'm happy to take questions. I guess I will stop sharing my screen here.
Thanks, Pascal.
And then we can go to questions.
Sounds great. There's a lot of directions we could take this conversation. It's going to be interesting to see where we end up. To start with, let's start with Abby's research. on danger rating perception. As I understand it, her research suggests that, you know, about 3/4 of the respondents perceive a linear pattern of severity with the ascending levels of the avalanche danger scale. How do you think that as a community, how do you think we should interpret this?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and we had a very good conversation about this a couple of days ago. And I really think there's sort of two ways of going. So there's sort of the scientific perspective that this is an exponential scale. And that's an interesting starting point. But I think in some ways our research shows that naturally people just look at these scales linearly. And so there's two ways we can go from there. It's one, we can spend time trying to educate everybody that it is an exponential scale, but I think this is actually a fairly complicated concept for people to understand. And so I wonder whether it's worthwhile the effort for us to do this. The other possible direction is to simply accept that people look at it in a linear scale and therefore think, well, how can we design this linear scale so that the end user perceives those conditions in the way we want them to perceive the conditions and take actions the way we think is meaningful for them. And let me give you an example here. So the danger rate scale is really sort of the primary communication tool for lower end users who might solely rely on that information for making a decision whether they go out into the backcountry or not. So do you want that segment to perceive considerable to be from 40 to 60 on a scale from 0 to 100? Or do you want them to perceive that condition to be from 50 to 75? Which would likely, we haven't tested that would be something for a future research project, but would likely or potentially result in a different choice for them. So I think we have to we have those two different pathways to pursue. But I think the second one is probably the more promising than trying to convince everybody that it's an exponential scale.
And I have a feeling you have something to say.
Oh, no, I was looking through the chat and thinking about that great response. I thought maybe we could dive into, Pascal, you're finding that the perception of the danger rating didn't really have much to do, there wasn't a strong link to behavior. So what do we make of that absence of a relationship?
Yeah, I think I've thought about this a bunch, and I think people are probably quite focused on those keywords much more than the numeric sort of perception of the severity of the conditions. And they've probably come up with sort of their personal routines of how they behave during those different conditions. And I think in some ways, the results of that second question seem to highlight that we're actually doing a fairly good job in terms of telling people what they should be doing when those keywords show up in the avalanche forecast. So in some ways that highlights that education is doing a good job on that side. The other thing that I want to highlight is that the differences between these different perception classes that we identified are actually quite subtle. Like it's just slightly exponential or slightly convex. And so I'm not surprised that these subtle differences don't have a huge impact on whether people go out during high or not. So I think there's just a lot of other factors playing a role there.
I think it may be worth talking about a little bit, Pascal, for I'm sure we have some viewers or who didn't have a chance to watch the entire presentation. And so as I understand it, what your presentation showed is that even though it seems that people don't actually understand the exponential nature of the scale, it doesn't mean that they're not necessarily using the scale in a way that is wrong, especially at the poles of the scale. So especially at the lower and the higher end, they seem to be using it quite well. It's those spots in the middle where you see more of a mixed response. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have of our sample about 2/3 of the people basically decide not to go into the backcountry based on the danger rating alone when the danger rating is high or extreme. And this is generally sort of the behavior that we try to promote. I don't know whether I can say that like it's challenging in the middle. Like we definitely see that in the middle range, people then incorporate additional information into their decision, like whether it's the avalanche problems or the forecast details. And then at the lower end, I can't remember the percentages from the top of my head, but I think it was about 1/3 of people who, when the danger rating is low, they just go out. They basically use that as a green light. And that percentage goes down to about 5% at moderate. So that was sort of the general pattern that we found. And then we were able to sort of split out more specific patterns out of this. And yeah, I would say in general, like people behave meaningfully as we teach them, even though they don't understand the exponential growth of that scale, which makes me think that, well, maybe it doesn't really matter whether they
it's so interesting. We get stuck on these ideas, but at the end of the day, that's the question. Does it?
Yeah.
I mean, it matters at some levels, but in terms of communication and what we spend our time teaching people, does it really matter?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's sort of this scientific debate, but then in the end, does it really matter when the rubber hits the road? For me, the more interesting conversation is, well, if people treat high and extreme the same, especially at the lower end, do we need those two different levels? And if we didn't have them, would that move considerable into a more meaningful spot for them? And so that's my question. Like, I'm not advocating for changing the scale immediately because there's a whole bunch of other challenges around that. But I think it's a worthwhile question to ask ourselves.
It's definitely a worthwhile question. We have a live question from Blaine Woods. Blaine, are you still there?
Blaine, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, there you are.
Awesome. So this is kind of for Pascal and the moderators. So with the prediction of higher potential for more backcountry users based off of ski area operations, how can we use that research to better tailor our forecasts for the moderate and considerable, those danger levels during this upcoming season?
Yeah, Blaine, I think that's a fantastic question. And I think it's particularly important for the upcoming season, but I think it's a general trend that we see more and more people sort of heading into the backcountry. And I think we just, as a community, we have to think about what are the communication tools that really resonate with these lower end users, and how can we help them make the best decisions. The vast majority of the users don't want to become avalanche forecasters or snow scientists. And I think we have to accept that and really just try to sort of get clear messages out to them that they can directly use. And I'm going to use the same cop-out that Julie used, that I can't give you any specifics, but I think we should look into it more in the future.
We have about a minute and a half. Anne, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, I'm fully on board with that, but I think, right, as Pascal said, engaging our audience at those entry points with really effective products for them, and also thinking about how we can facilitate their progression in meaningful ways if they're keen to progress with us.
Yeah, Blaine, I think it's a great question. I think it's spot on. You know, regardless of the number of people going out, I think many times, you know, the moderate and considerable ranges as a forecaster, it's the hardest time to communicate because there is so much nuance that kind of goes along. Not always, but a lot of times it's common to kind of be on the border between whether you're going to turn it yellow or turn it orange and what that means to the user. And so it's a great question. It's time to wrap it up. Pascal, thanks.
Thanks,
I think
everybody.
we could go for another hour on this one. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Great. We will transition now over to Dr. Benjamin Reuter, our next presenter. And Ben wears many hats as both a researcher and a mountain guide. He's conducted studies with the SLF on variations of snow instability, as well as with Montana State, looking into how weak layers fail. And his current work is with Matteo France, examining the impacts of climate change. And in addition to all of this, Ben is also interested in applications for practitioners. So welcome, Ben. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you, and I will try to give a quick wrap up of the video I put online. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a risk assessment approach that we use now to teach professionals. And this work has been really developed over the past 4 years, and with contributions from Chris, Alexi, Jörg, Doug, and Carl. Thank you guys for supporting me there and for your discussions we had. There are a number of risk assessment strategies out there, and I don't want to go into detail. Just roughly, they mostly compare current conditions and terrain characteristics. And we all know that these strategies that are out there, they have some weaknesses when it comes to risk estimation and at individual slopes, and when we want to also incorporate local snow cover information. So it comes with no surprise that these strategies are not very popular among professionals. And this is also the outcome of one of the studies of Marcus Landry. So the question is, what do professionals actually do? And I mean, we are all doing something, and actually we're weighing a lot of factors. And so here are a lot of factors. Let's sort this out. There's a blue group and there's a pink group. The blue group, I put the big D up there, stands for danger or hazard. And the pink group, there's a big C up there, it stands for the consequences. And these two elements, danger and consequences, we usually combine them to obtain a risk. And if we can use meaningful mitigation, we can even reduce the risk. So this is the approach, what it is about. The method is called DCMR. And DCMR is not only a strategy in the field to assess the risk, but it's also a communication vehicle. So you can actually talk with your buddy and say, hey, look, there's a slope, and yeah, it's 35 degrees steep and it snowed 2 days ago. What are the chances this thing comes down? Then to see what happens if it comes down. Is there a cliff below? And then you can think of useful mitigation. Maybe go one by one, or park your partner in a corner where you can observe you well. All these things would count into the mitigation M. And at the end remains the risk that you take or you don't. In the video I put online, we planned a trip together, and we used this little booklet here that you see on my desk, and this is called the Winter Journal, and we planned a trip. And we went through all this, so the cruxes together, and we had to answer those tricky questions that are behind those keywords. we factored in current information about the snowpack. We estimated the danger, the local danger, and then we actually evaluated all those points for the likelihood of triggering the danger, which is the blue part, and the pink part, the consequences. So this is very briefly a reminder what I mean when I say DCMR now. And for me, DCMR is an approach that really mirrors the professional approach, and this is what we teach in guide trainings and IFMJ guide trainings in Germany and also in Eastern Europe now. And what I also really like about this approach that it really respects the scales. So it uses the information at the right scale it is designed for. And yeah, for everybody who's listening now, this is a chance also to use all this know-how that you acquired during the workshop in the past 2 days and also today, and use it next winter by using the little booklet that is around now. And thanks to Orthovox to make it available. And this book will help you to collect data, analyze information, and also share your thoughts. Remember, it's also a communication thread. Who's interested in this book can contact me or use the QR code. And for the moment, this is it. I unshare my screen. Yep. I'm back with you, Anne and Simon.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Ben. This is a very detailed and thorough resource, and so we're really excited to learn more about your design process. And I thought maybe we could start also with its intended use, and if you could fill us in about the professional and recreational communities over in Switzerland so that we can better understand what motivated its design for you.
Yeah, Anne, as you already explained in my the introduction, is I work as a researcher but also as a guide. So I'm in the field with students when I'm a guide, and I also train becoming guides, aspiring guides. So I'm really confronted with the problem of organizing your thoughts. And one day we were out in the field, and everybody came up with a different way of analyzing the slope in front of us. So at the end of the day, we all decided we follow now a certain path. That makes it easier, and we don't forget elements, and everybody can really follow. We're on the same page. We're talking about the D now, and then we talk about the C, and so on. And later then, together with my colleagues, we actually entered all this data and made it a bigger structure, and used the current research that has been done on those fields to actually come up with those questions. So that's kind of the process, how it came about.
Great, thank you. We already have some questions in the chat about where people can get a copy of the book.
So for the moment, the best is to send an email. Or to go on the web and download the pages of the book. First, it came out in German 2 years ago. Then we translated it to English, and for the moment, it's available in Europe with Orthovox. And I hope, let's see, we can maybe also make a US or a Canadian version of it, because now it has the European danger scale, for instance, in it, and it's not just a booklet like in terms of a workbook. It's also helps you recap all those basics like avalanche size, crystals, how to do snow pit, how to look at the tests and all that. So we really would have to come up with a US version. And if somebody wants to use that really in their operation, please be in touch with us, and we're happy to work out together with you and a nice way that you can use the book and to make the adaptations that are needed for your operation.
And we've got a couple questions that people are interested in your email, if you're willing to share it.
Yes, it's how should we do? It's my second name.
You know what? We'll just throw it into the chat. That sounds,
this is great.
Good? Cool.
Yeah, just throw it to the chat. It was in the presentation.
Yeah, so Ben, you mentioned that considering its utility here in the US and Canada, we have a wide range in our recreation and professional context in terms of the activity types. We have snowshoers, ice climbers, and a large contingent of mountain snowmobilers. We have different demographics and snow climates, geography, and a broad range in the understanding of our users. So how do you think the Winter Journal can be scaled to accommodate this range? For example, like an entry-level user or a motorized user. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, let's maybe first talk about the people and then talk about the terrain. Yeah, I think the Winter Journal is certainly a little book that, yeah, it's really small. It really fits into your pocket. You can really bring it to the field, and that's a strong point. But it also has the disadvantage that, I mean, it's not a book, so we can't put everything in it, and it actually only works with good training. So you want to use this book in a training, and then you want to learn how to use the book. And this being said, it's really a book that is designed for people who are interested in the topic and who want to dig a little deeper. And I'm not just talking about the snow and digging pits, but really digging deeper into the topic. But I mean, there are also situations where we don't really have the information. So even if somebody who is trained and he knows how the processes work and has answered these questions in other situations already, might get to its limits because the information is just not available. And for these cases, we also have shortcuts. You can use the the slope angle, for instance, as an indicator of the hazard. And these tools also allow people who are not as solid in the topic to get an estimate. So they allow a start to work with this method. Yeah, as I said, we use it in the guiding community, and we have really good feedback from those trainings because it really structures the thought process, and it's process based, so people can really grow into this method. So what you teach them in the beginning, in the first class, the first Avalanche class, they can use that tool, and then they take the second class and the advanced class, and they can always work with this book, and they will be motivated to learn. So you don't have to switch any methods, and I think this is also an advantage. But certainly, it works best for professionals and for operations. I think the way it is designed at the moment. For the terrain, yeah, I mean you got loads of terrain and different climates and also different users. I mean, just think about the snowmobilers that you mentioned. And we don't have them in Europe. Yeah, snowmobilers cover a lot of terrain, and I think also when you go free riding, like with a big gondola in a ski resort, like in the Alps, you go to Verbier or to Chamonix, you cover a lot of terrain in a day. And that just means you have to take more decisions, and it means more work. So you have to maybe use 2 pages in the book. But I think what's really useful also for people like snowmobilers, they can do a local danger assessment for like the small catchment or the small area where they travel. And I think having this tool in the book, that helps you get this danger estimate is an advantage, which makes it unique. Because in the US and in Canada, you have those forecasting regions are really large, larger compared than to areas in Europe. And there you really want to do this local danger assessment. And this is also one thing that you can do with a book.
Thanks, Ben. We have a live question from Carl. Carl, are you still there?
Yeah. Hi, Ben. Thanks for that work. I really like the approach. It's really one of the first things that I've seen that sort of provides a simple structure for what I think a lot of pros do in the field. And my question just comes, really from, I'm just curious, over in Europe, you know, you've been introducing this with the guides in Germany and in other parts of Europe. And I'm wondering, what about some of the other countries where this approach has not yet been introduced? Are those guides still using, are they still using things more, these, the tools that are focused really on the terrain and the danger scale? Or are those guides also sort of using this, but in a more informal way?
Yeah, Carl, this is a good question, and yeah, it's hard to say because you can't. Yeah, you only hear what people tell you about other trainings, and yeah, you only do a guide training once in a life, so you don't really know what people do. But I think I mean, it's quite intuitive, this approach to compare danger and hazard and consequences to obtain a risk, and I think this is something we all do. And this is just here, this is actually nothing new. This is just a way of formalizing it, of writing it up, of bringing it into some structure. And I think those thoughts about what could happen if there was an avalanche, what would happen to me and my buddies, to the group, these thoughts, we've always taken them into account. And I think also in other trainings, this will be accounted for. And I think the times that we only or that we focused much on the reduction method or derivatives of it, those times are over. And I think most trainings, they really have an open approach where different methods have their place and are applied in the when they in the fields where they are actually applicable.
Awesome, thanks.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think I've been looking through this the last couple days, and I guess from my perspective, what's really apparent to me is basically what you've created is a workflow, and I think it is intuitive, but it's also fairly complex, and I fully I think it. Like, to me, it's intuitive. I think it's very interesting. I can see it being applied to an operation or in a guiding scenario. But I do struggle a little bit in the sense of trying to figure out how and if it can be applied to people without much knowledge. And so it seems, and I'm curious in your thoughts on this, but it seems to me like it may be hard for somebody that's beginning to pick this up and find it intuitive. But if it was used in a classroom setting, and if people were trained on the workflow, then maybe that's something they could build upon through their years. Would you agree with that, or do you think it actually is easier to use than I think it is?
No, Simon, I fully agree. I mean, this book is a small book. As I said, you can put it in your pocket, and that doesn't give room for much explanation, and it's not totally self-explaining. So it's really it should be sold with a class. Those are the words of a guide. No, but I totally agree, and it requires training to take these decisions and answer those questions. But what I also think is quite good is that if you can't answer the questions, then you also know what you know. And sometimes I can't answer the questions, and I just know, hey, then we don't have much information. And this is an answer as such. No?
Thank you.
We don't have too much time left, Ben, but I did just want to talk with you about examining its effectiveness, because that's something I'm really interested in. And do you have to consider how you can empirically observe some of the ways that this works for people?
Yeah, and I worked on a couple of fields related to snow, but I really have no idea how to to do a study on that, but maybe together with Pascal and his team, or with some of your colleagues, we can actually design something. And I think that the challenges I see I'm not really sure how we would see how we would figure out how people took their decision before they went down the slope, or So I think this is something we would have to make sure that we know what their thoughts were, and the other thing is, I think with all these methods, and if you really want to test them, I think it's not that easy, because you want to validate the preventive power they have, but in the end you also want to see how much terrain is actually accessible. So you have to look at both sides. Not only can you avoid an accident with a certain method, I mean, this is an easy thing. Just stay away from the slopes. You go cross country skiing and you're good. But you also want to ski in the end. So yeah, we really would have to design something smart. So far, I can just say, I mean, from the subjective observations that I made, and that I made together with my colleagues in the trainings, is that when you use this communication tool, actually your buddy becomes the checker. He checks on you because you explain him in this structure what your thoughts are. So you're actually sharing your thoughts, and your buddy is basically on the same page as you are, and he can follow, and he can tell you, hey, no, this is not the case, or oh, I think differently. And you really have a communication structure that you both share. And this, I think, is one strength. And I mean,
awesome.
He's out there with you, huh? So
we've got to wrap it up. We're pushing our time, but I appreciate it. Thank you, Ben. That was good. That concludes our session. I want to thank all of our presenters for their time and their insight, and encourage everyone to please reach out to them if you have further questions, or if your questions, if we didn't get to you, I'm sorry, but reach out to the presenters and have a one-on-one. I also want to thank everybody that worked on CSAW this year. For me, this is a memorable event. It was really fun. I had a good time. The last thing I'll say is something that stands out in this session is that design matters, and that a multidisciplinary approach to better understanding our avalanche risk communication, it not only allows us to better understand what we're good at, but I think it can help us improve and maybe even give us a pathway to that progress. So thanks for having us. And I'll turn it back over to Ethan.
Great. Thanks, Simon and Anne, for moderating that session. Really interesting discussions. And thanks to all the speakers who presented and everybody who asked questions. It all came together really nicely, and it was great to kind of be a fly on the wall and listen to everybody's thoughts. Yeah, so many things popped out of it for me. So I guess I'll be chewing on that for a while. So our next presentation is from the American Avalanche Association, who is a sponsor of today's CSAW, or this week's CSAW, I suppose. So our speaker is Katie Warren. Katie is a ski patroller and highway forecaster in the state of Washington. She's been an avalanche educator for many years and continues to do that. And she also serves on the board of directors for the American Avalanche Association, and where she holds the position of secretary. So Katie is going to talk to us about some of the stuff that AAA has been doing, and also a census project that they did about the avalanche industry, not to be confused with the current federal census that we're having here in our country right now. So over to you, Katie.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Yeah, please don't confuse that with the national census. I'd just like to thank everybody for giving us the time and to present a little bit about the American Avalanche Association, and then a little bit about, like I said, the research that we've been doing. Let me get my screen sharing up.
So Katie, we can see a presentation. Yeah, there you go.
All right,
Perfect.
Can everybody see this?
Looks great.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Ethan. Yeah, as we said, I'm a board member for the American Avalanche Association, and we've got some updates and some just general information that I will try to get through so you guys get a good amount of your break. The American Avalanche Association has been working to keep people safe in avalanche country since 1986. And our main focus and efforts to support the community are in education, professional development, publishing, and outreach. So a little bit about what we do in education and professional development. We facilitated the Division of Professional Avalanche Education and the Recreational Avalanche Education. We provide standards and review for both of these programs, especially the professional program that has been going very well. We support the snow and avalanche workshops across the US, like this one that we're in right now. We support professional development scholarships and also support research activities in the industry. So publishing and outreach, most of you are probably familiar with the Avalanche Review. If you're not, it's a great publication that comes out 4 times a year throughout the winter, and current events and research. I will talk about it in just a moment, but we just launched a digital version of the Avalanche Review, which we're really excited about, that's free online. New this winter, we have decided that it's better to let you guys download free digital copies of our other publications, including the Snowy Torrents, the Snow, Weather, and Avalanche Observation Guidelines, or SWAGs, and those swag stickers are all available now for free on our website for digital download. So go to our store is where you can find those. And you can still buy hard copies. Those are still out there. We just offer the free digital version as well. Our main venue for outreach is avalanche.org, which we work alongside the National Avalanche Center with. This is basically a hub for all the US avalanche forecasting centers, so you can get information on current avalanche forecasts across the US, as well as a wealth of other information, including A3 reviewed professional and recreational avalanche course providers. So you can assure that whoever you're signing up with is a reputable avalanche education provider. So a little bit about digital TAR. It's based on, but pretty significantly different from the print version. We've chosen articles that specifically benefit from the rich digital media and visual media that the web-based platforms provide. We have included timeless articles that we typically, as avalanche professionals, go back and review quite frequently. So you can find those on there, as well as up-to-date timely articles and information on current events and research that we feel is best distributed in a timely manner besides our print version of TAR. So go ahead and go check that out at theavalanchereview.org. I'd like to take a moment here to just thank our major sponsors. These companies have really stuck through it with us during these hard financial times, and we really couldn't provide the support to you guys, our avalanche community, without these sponsors. So if you have some time, go check them out. If they offer products that you are interested in, please consider supporting them. We really couldn't do it without these companies. A little bit of a season recap from 1920. It ended a little bit harshly this spring, but overall it was still a good season for our organization. We were still able to sponsor 10 snow and avalanche workshops across the country, deliver research grants. We had a 3rd successful season of the pro training program. We were able to sponsor ISSW. We have 400 new members to our organization, which is quite a lot. We're pretty happy about that. As I indicated, our publishing the Avalanche Review went out without a hitch. We have new free downloads from our other publications. Avalanche.org development has continued, and we've seen a huge increase in traffic on that site, as well as our social media activity. Going forward in 2021, COVID's been a pretty hard time for most nonprofits, us included. So as a board, we've really decided to focus 2021 on events and activities that really bring people together, create a sense of community, and support the greatest number of members. So with that being said, two things that are going to be put on hiatus for this year are our research grants and our professional development scholarships. Those you can look forward in the future to come back, of course, but we have decided to take those funds and use them for things that support a greater number of members. So that being said, the Avalanche Review publications will still be 4 editions throughout this winter. We've launched the online version of the Avalanche Review, so go check that out. We're also beginning a seminar series on November 5th, which is also the date of our JEB. Pretty quickly hear about that information, so we're really excited about that. The seminar will begin directly after our general membership meeting. We will still continue to support the Snow and Avalanche workshops and avalanche.org and continue our outreach to new backcountry users, which has been talked about in previous presentations. We're likely to see a lot of new backcountry users this winter. We'll continue the free distribution of swag, snowy torrents, and the swag reference stickers, and continue support of the pro training program in the US. So information, if you're not a member and you're looking to join, you can go ahead and shoot an email to join@avalanche.org. And really becoming a member is a quick, easy way to keep up to date on everything going on in the Avalanche industry currently. As well as, you have access to some prizes and drawings and some other information. So please come check us out. As we mentioned in the beginning, a few of us put together a census of information just to figure out a little bit more about who we are as an industry. There's a lot of assumptions out there, but we didn't really have any data to back it up. I'd like to thank my other authors, Ava, John, and Halstead, as well as everybody else who helped out with this project. I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm just going to go through a brief overview of our results. But you can look for an article about this project in this edition of TAR, which should be in your mailboxes, if not today, very soon, as well at ISSW 2021. So the purpose of this study is to better understand the demographics of individuals working as Avalanche professionals in the US in order to better serve you. We also wanted to identify areas of improvement in diversity, professional development, and working conditions in the Avalanche industry. So we developed a comprehensive survey that was distributed through a variety of channels in order to reach these goals. So I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to many people working in the industry, but we do suffer from a lack of diversity in both gender and ethnic origin. As you can see, in most occupations, we are significantly male. Our 84% of our respondents identified as male, and females are underrepresented in every occupation. Forecasting is especially low for females. The average age of our respondents were in their 40s, and they often had over 10 years of experience in the Avalanche industry. So very experienced people were likely to respond to our survey. Ethnic demographics, 92% of our respondents identified as white or Caucasian. So we've got a little bit of work to do in this portion. And this is part of a greater project by A3 to improve diversity within our industry and to take active steps in this. And we started this project before, the greater environment, what's going on in our country began, but it is important. So this is a step in the right direction in identifying these areas that can be improved. One interesting thing that came out of this research is the professional training in the Avalanche industry. It's interesting to note that consistently Avalanche professionals have more training than their employer requires. As you can see, this data also identifies the fact that we are in a transition period from the previous level 3 to our new professional track, and there has been an increase in respondents saying that Pro 1 and Pro 2 Avalanche courses are becoming a requirement. But as you can see, a significant amount of our respondents said that no professional avalanche training was required for their employment. However, hardly any respondents indicated that they have no professional training. And this high degree of employee commitment has been seen across the board in the industry, and it also extended to continuing professional development opportunities such as ISSW and regional SAWs. Employees are likely to attend these events even without their support or of their employers. They're doing it on their own dime, so to say. So that's what I've got. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions, but thank you guys for the time. This has been a great 3 days. Lots of good information.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Thanks for the updates and for sharing the census work with us. That's super interesting. There are some questions for you, but we do have to move on to the break because it's a pretty heavy day. So if you want to answer those questions in the Q&A for people, that would be great. And you can check in with us here in the War Room. We'll help you with that. So for everybody else, we've got a 10-minute break now. So we're going to come back at 10:40 for Tech Talk with Dimuth, and then we will start the next session at 10:45. So this is your chance to run around the block, do some burpees or jumping jacks, and we'll see you back here at 10:40. Thank you. Well, that break went too fast, but welcome back. And we got, I think, a pretty strong finish to 3 days of CSAW. So I hope you're hanging in there because I think this last session is going to be great. But first, we're going to hear from one of our sponsors. Ross at Dimuth is going to give us our next Tech Talk. Ross, are you out there?
I'm here.
Great. Take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate the time and the ability to support the CSAW event. And yeah, your third round of daily reminders of taking care of your gear and making sure your skins and everything is working appropriately. So, I'm sure there's quite a few people who have heard me already, but, our focus and our goal for, being a part of this event was just to highlight taking care of your stuff and listening to the signs and the feelings that you have in the skin track that something might not be right in your gear. So don't ignore it if you hear something or feel something when you're stepping into your bindings that could potentially be a problem later on that day. So we just produced 2 tech talks, one focused on your boot binding interface and the other focused on taking care of your climbing skins. So make sure you check those out. Some of the key points are just the basic adjustment of your sole length if you've changed anything, or even just to double check that nothing got bumped. So, those 2 different types of spacing there to absorb the flex of your ski. And then also we stress a lot making sure you take care of that interface at the toe piece. The connection of the insert and the toe piece that you can see highlighted here is really, really specific and tight. The tolerances are really tight. So any sort of snow or debris in that system can create a problem. So we always just want to reinforce that making sure that that is clear of debris and ready to go is super, super important. Lastly, we spoke about just kind of the basics of skincare and skin maintenance. Dry skins, not letting them get super hot and affecting the glue when you store them, putting them on right, and then just making sure that you take care of your ski actually, because a lot of people don't realize if you don't wax your skis, you will have problems with your skin glue and your skin adhesion. So a good maintained ski base avoids ice buildup as well as avoids pulling the glue off the skin when you transition. So just some basic stuff there. Really appreciate being able to be a part of the CSAW event, and that's it from our side.
Great. Thanks, Ross. When you're talking about ski preparation, base preparation, is that really just wax, or are there other things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's so silly, but a lot of times when you start seeing glue sticking to your ski base, a hot scrape and a hot wax and just making sure that that base is maintained well makes such a huge difference. You know, using a citrus cleaner to get that glue off the ski base, or if you have just really dirty bases from spring skiing especially, it makes such a difference in bonding and like not creating like too much adhesion with that glue, for sure.
Great, thanks. I've always taken a lot of pride in running poorly maintained equipment, but my daughter is a ski racer now, so I've learned a lot about base preparation and ski mechanics. And along those lines, you were talking about the spacing of the heel for your boots. I do change boots in my bindings occasionally. Do you guys sell a tool to do that gap spacing or kiss spacing? You have some.
Yeah, it comes with the binding. And so pretty much every shop that you would go to have service, they probably have just like a whole jar full of these little space tools. And that way, yeah, absolutely. That's a good thing to have, and a good way to just double check it too. You know, in the fall when you bring your gear out for the first time, just to be sure nothing moved.
So you're telling me to look in the box and read the directions. So that's good advice for all of us.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks, Ross. Really appreciate the tech talks you've added over the last couple of days, and the support of this event, and also the support for the Friends of the CAC and the CAC in general. It's great to have you guys as partners.
Awesome, appreciate it, and congrats on 3 days of virtual events.
Thanks. I'm not going to take a victory lap just yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm warming up. So that leads us into our next session and final session, which is on avalanche accidents. And again, I think we have some really interesting speakers, both people that are known to all of us and an outside speaker with Robert DeBoer, which I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. So our moderators for this session are Angela Hawes and Scott Savage. Let's see, Angela is currently the president of the American Mountain Guides Association and has been really active in that association, and especially as a trainer for over 15 years. She has worked ski patrolling and avalanche forecasting and as a ski guide in many parts of the world, in Colorado, formerly for Telluride Helitrax, a helicopter ski operation. She also has a master's degree in international mountain conservation and is a owner, operator, current ski guide, as well as representing her professional organization. Scott Savage has been a ski patroller and forecaster. He worked for over a decade at Big Sky Ski Resort, and I had the pleasure of working with him there myself. He's done a lot of other work in our field, and one notable piece is as a founding member of Avalanche Worker Safety, a nonprofit organization that's focused on the safety of avalanche workers and runs the avalanchenearmiss.org online database that collects information on near misses in the workplace. And Scott is currently working at the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, where he's been the director since 2015. So thanks, Scotty and Angela, for being with us, and I will turn it over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Ethan. So yeah, I would like to thank the whole CAIC staff for running such basically a flawless operation. I hope I didn't just jinx it, but until now, and thanks for the opportunity to moderate this session. We're really looking forward to this with some awesome speakers. So Angela?
Thanks, Scotty, and just echo that. Big thanks to Ethan and the entire CAC staff and friends of CAC behind the scenes there, making this just an excellent event. Like, congratulations. I think it's been excellent so far. I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker today on the outbreak of avalanche incidents in the San Juans in March of 2020. And welcome Ann Mellick. It's my pleasure to introduce Ann. Ann's been an avalanche forecaster for the CAIC and worn the hats of both backcountry and avalanche forecasting since 2005. And she spends her winters on Highway 550, the $1 Million Highway, and 145 corridors in the North San Juans, working in conjunction with the Colorado Department of Transportation to keep the highways safe for winter travelers. While Ann enjoys the snow and challenge of winter work, she always looks forward to the summer months when she can enjoy the simplicity of flip-flops and the relative serenity of gardening. And as a resident of the North San Juans myself, I have tremendous respect for Ann and gratitude for her and the entire CAC team for their work in one of the most problematic snowpacks in the world. And with that, I'll let Ann take it away.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to go ahead and try to get my slides going here. Whoops. If I can share my screen. How's that?
Perfect.
Great. Bear with me. Okay. So thanks, Angela, and thanks, Scotty. Feel pretty lucky to have you as my moderators. You guys rock, and thanks to all the other presenters in this whole workshop. You all have been amazing, and I've learned so much. So I'm honored to be here and representing the CAIC as well. So for those of you who did not see my presentation or just need a little reminder, we had an extraordinary outbreak of avalanches, incidents, and accidents last March here in the San Juan, coinciding with the COVID-19 lockdown. So just this rash of human slides occurred both in the North and South San Juan, but these numbers in this slide are just for the North San Juan zone where things were particularly active. So we had, during the month of March, 21 human triggered slides, and that is reported. We don't always hear about every single slide. 16 of those were considered incidents, which means that was a human involved in moving snow. 7 involved riders carried a significant distance, 4 partially buried, 1 critical, 4 injuries, 2 serious injuries, and 2 full rescues. This was an extraordinary amount of incidents and accidents at any one time, but especially unnerving because of the timing, really at the beginning of the whole COVID madness that we've now learned to live with. Really was a perfect storm of factors. We had a persistent weak layer in the upper snowpack and a series of storms after a prolonged dry spell, mixed with closed ski areas and lots of out of work people with plenty of time on their hands. In short, we had a touchy snowpack combined with pretty hungry skiers and riders ready for powder. This photo, in case anyone's interested, it was a skier triggered slide in Bear Creek on the backside of the Telluride Ski Resort. So to break down our cocktail of contributing factors, first we had a reactive persistent weak layer from a long dry spell of dry weather in February and early March. And this got subsequently buried by a heavy load by a series of storms throughout the mid to late March. And this picture for snow people kind of tells it all. A couple more images to illustrate our problem. You can see our snowpack setup and subsequent avalanching. These are from 2 skier triggered slides near the town of Ophir pretty close to one another at the same, roughly same aspect and elevation. The image on the left is a snow profile from a skier triggered slide where a rider was taken for a significant ride and sustained major life-threatening injuries. But moreover, this picture, it's again obvious to any snow worker, this is a pretty bad snowpack. It doesn't take any testing to see that it's not stable, or let's just say it's ugly. The photo on the right is another skier triggered slide during that March cycle, and luckily the skier was able to ski out of this one, and but you can see it was significant and quite large propagation. So again, back to our cocktail, we had our weak layer, our slab, and we add hungry and pent up out of work natives after a long dry spell. And really the snowpack was primed for avalanching right as backcountry use was really skyrocketing. And then you stir in pandemic for good luck and all of the associated complicating factors with that. And you get the outbreak of incidents and accidents. Again, it was an extraordinary cluster of events at any time, but complicated by the COVID-19. And thankfully there were no fatalities nor known transmissions. And just a note on this picture, this was also one of the heli evac slides, skier triggered slides. This is near the town of Rico. And thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Anne. Very interesting presentation. And for folks who haven't seen the video, highly recommend checking that out to get the full version. But hopefully that photo of the pit where the skier triggered avalanche was in the banker slope will deter more traffic here. It's a pretty remarkable snowpack that people were just going for it with that little amount of depth that we had in the clear problem there. Hey, a question here for you. You mentioned some highly likely reasons that there was an increase in the incidents, like time off, tracked out moderate terrain, increased user pressure, the pandemic. Did you discuss with the parties involved any of their decision making or terrain choice to better get a sense of what was going on in their minds?
Let's see. Well, there are a lot of several incidents and accidents, and I am one of many forecasters here, so it really is a team effort, especially when there are accidents with injuries. We always do investigations and we always do that as a team. So I will say I didn't speak to everyone in all of these accidents, but I would say it really varied. And some were from more novice users and actually the ones that involved rescues, those were actually more advanced users. And one thing that was mentioned is that they were pushed into terrain that they may not have normally gone to just because of some of the regular terrain being tracked out, or just lots of people. This was again really early on, people really wanting to social distance, but also because of different county closures. And so they were pushing into new terrain that they might not have known as well. But yeah.
Yeah, risk tolerance certainly went down with more like just looking at terrain options, skiing tracked terrain that was more moderate. Didn't seem like it was high enough reward or something, huh?
I think things just slowly shift in our minds, and it happens to all of us. You know, accidents are never one single factor. It's, you know, little mistake by little mistake. And, you know, we try hard not to point the finger. Obviously something went wrong if you're involved in an avalanche. But I don't know, I think as humans, we're just so fallible and we make little mistake by little mistake, and just pushing into terrain that you hadn't planned on that morning, it didn't seem like a bad idea at the time until it does.
Exactly. Scotty, you have another question?
Yeah, so it's kind of related to that one, Anne. We got a question from the audience from David. So he asked, did you note any risk behavior differences in backcountry users, presumably based on pandemic shutdowns or reminders by the Avalanche Center to avoid overtaxing the EMS system? So you kind of hit on how, you know, it was changing the behavior of the individual users, that they may have been taking more risk to go to places where they could get to untracked powder. But did you notice anything based on your risk messaging with your operation? Do you think that had an effect, I think is what he's asking?
I think it's a good question and a good point, something we certainly talked a lot about. Myself and fellow forecasters spoke a lot about risk at the time, and I certainly can't speak to what all the users were doing. I think some people were really dialing it back, and some maybe were just seeing it as an opportunity to ski like any other day, or, you know, being out of work is kind of like a hall pass, and that they were just going to be, you know, normally careful, you know, the way they always are, but maybe we're taking more risk. I don't know. I can't speak to that. All I can say is how I felt.
Awesome. Thanks, Ann.
Great. And we have a live question from Ian Mahaffey, and I apologize if I hacked your last name there. Ian, why don't you unmute yourself?
No, you did great. That sounded great. So obviously a huge storm of factors that nobody really could have anticipated for this past season. And since then, have you or the organization been able to come up with any new ideas about how to communicate risk? Like, it seems like people may not have been even heeding the risk communication that was already out there, but has there been any new ideas about how to maybe have communicated it differently or more emphatically with this really perfect storm of risk factors?
Thanks for the question, Ian. I don't think, I think the short answer is no. We have always done our best to communicate the hazard and the problem as clearly as we can, and back it up with data and observations, and make that as accessible as we can for a variety of users as possible. What people do with that information is ultimately up to them. So when it comes to the backcountry, you know, we provide the information and the user is the one who makes the decision at the end of the day. So no, I don't think we're going to do anything different, with exception to we are trying to put more information on our website and do more educational outreach, because we do foresee more backcountry use, and particularly more backcountry use by newer people. You know, we all heard about gear shops selling out of skis and fishing poles and everything, you know, outdoor related in the past, 6-8 months. I think there will be quite a number of new users, and we are trying to do outreach and put more information, educational information on our website. But other than that, we're just going to continue to forecast the way we always have, put our daily forecasts out and put the best information out that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about individual responsibility, definitely. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Ann, the next question here, it's one that someone submitted, Jeff Irons, and I'm going to kind of ad-lib it a little bit, add a little more nuance to it. So Jeff said, given the perfect storm you accurately described, it's surprising there were not more incidents. And you noted that there were 21 reported human-triggered avalanches. So his question is, do you have any anecdotal or word-of-mouth indications that there may have been more that went unreported? So I guess maybe if you start with, you know, how do you define reported? And then what's your estimate or your sense for how many actual events do you have in your neck of the woods that go unreported compared to what you actually could record?
Well, to begin with, I did put in quotations. We had 21 reported skier triggered slides. I would say we have a pretty good network of users and forecasters, and we're pretty connected to the community. I would like to think that we hear about the majority of slides, but I think we can't possibly hear about all of them, especially the smaller ones, maybe D1s in particular, just little, ooh, wow, that went under my feet. But I think the bigger ones, and particularly the skier involved ones, we'd like to think that we hear about one way or another. I'm sure there are some that go under the radar because there is some kind of like avalanche shaming, like people feel embarrassed if they trigger an avalanche, like they did something wrong or someone's going to judge them. And we really try our best to tamp that down and to make people feel really comfortable with reporting to forecasters, because ultimately that information helps us put a better forecast out. It makes everybody safer. So as far as underreporting, I'm sure there is some. There's no way to quantify it as a director of an avalanche center and an avalanche forecaster yourself. It's unknowable, that kind of number. We like to think we get most of them. We probably don't get all of them. Was there another part of the question that I missed?
I think that'll be good. Thanks, Ann.
Okay.
Back to Angela.
That's great. Thanks, Ann. That's a great answer there. We've got a live question from Bill Nally. Bill, go ahead and unmute yourself there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Ann. Hi, everyone. I thought I'd just chime in a little bit. I was the North San Juan backcountry forecaster last season, and I investigated quite a few of these avalanches. And to the last question, certainly there were some that we didn't see. A lot of the ones on that list were not reported, and we saw them and investigated, and some of them came in from text messages from some other people that said they saw an avalanche, and we added them to the list. So we aren't certain who triggered them or anything, but we have a pretty good idea. I'm not saying we got all of them. So that said, I think just a comment on the talk from the last session, and I think one of the factors that played in this string of avalanches was had to do with maybe a little bit misunderstanding of what the hazard rating actually means. I think we were clearly explaining what the hazard was, but when we said it was moderate, I think sometimes moderate means something else to certain groups, to certain people. And I would strongly encourage the community to try to reach out to the users in the future to describe what it is that we're actually saying, what it is that low and moderate and considerable actually mean. I think it's pretty clear what high and extreme mean to most people, but I think that was a factor. I heard through the grapevine.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That's super important, and I think it clearly is a miss in how we communicate the hazards. And the word itself, moderate, doesn't necessarily represent, nor does considerable at times. So I think Pascal's research into that was super interesting, and I'm sure a lot of considerations will be made with that in mind. Let's see, we have another question here from Patrick. Patrick asks, were these events witnessed across a multitude of elevations and aspects?
Thank you. First, I want to say thanks to Bill for calling in. He was a big part of this. Again, he was the backcountry forecaster at the time, and certainly did a lot of work recording and working on all of the slides as well as the forecast. So thanks, Bill. And the question again was, did these slides, were they on multiple aspects and elevations? The short answer is yes, but if memory serves. I'm a little rusty. It's the end of summer here. They were more often than not on shady or higher slopes, east through north through west, northerly, say northeast through northwest, near and above tree line. Well, a lot of them were near and below tree line. All elevations, shady slopes, predominantly. It was March, and later in the month we started seeing more problems on the sunnier slopes. As soon as the sun comes out here in the San Juan in the spring, it's for real. So hope that answers your question.
Game on.
Thanks, Ann. We kind of have a related one here from Roger Martorell. Sorry if I butchered the last name, but he was asking, was the weak layer widespread or localized, which you kind of hit on, and then if you can just talk a little bit about what was the avalanche danger during this cycle, and what was the avalanche problem. And he's also wondering if, was the avalanche problem highlighting the problem that existed, and, looking back on it, how do you feel that was treated, and would you do anything differently?
Okay, I'm gonna go back to, okay, could you ask the question again? It was, what was the hazard? Okay, the hazard and the problem, and how did we treat it?
Just kind of how you remember the trend in the hazard moving through time while this was all going on. He asked specifically if it was high.
Okay, so, sorry, Scott. It was, so I was speaking of the whole month of March. So the avalanche danger is dynamic. Obviously it changes every day, and sometimes it changes throughout the day and overnight. I can't speak to exactly what the hazard was for the whole month, but as Bill said, there were periods of low, moderate, and considerable. I don't recall ever hitting high. But again, my brain is a long ways out. I can't tell you what the problem was each day, and the hazard each day, because it was, again, the whole month of March. There was a significant period where we had the most of these slides, kind of a weak period with our biggest storm towards the end of the month of March. But again, I'm going to say it was moderate and considerable hazard, and I would imagine the main avalanche problem was persistent slab. So again, warning about that weak layer. And the messaging, if you went back to our forecasts, you can see the messaging was very clear, and you can look at our observations. There were lots of observations, lots of pictures, lots of pits and videos done by forecasters highlighting this particular weak layer of concern.
Great, Ann. Thanks. I think we about time to wrap it up. But I think in your presentation, the photograph that you have of the avalanche roses that show the number of avalanche incidents is a really good thing for people to refer to for those types of questions, because I think that really shows it all very well.
Yeah, it shows aspect, elevation, and trigger. So yeah, feel free to look at the video for that.
Thanks, Ann. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the hills.
Thanks, you guys. Be well.
Thanks, Sam. All right. So our moving along here, when I saw the CSAW schedule come out, this talk really jumped out at me as, maybe the can't miss presentation for the active mitigation crowd, especially the patrollers out there. So our next speaker is Ken Boakland. Ken's the ski patrol director at Alpine Meadows in California. And Ken started backcountry skiing in 1986 and has been a patroller for about 30 years, started in 1990. So Ken he's been a certified avalanche instructor with the American Avalanche Association. He's a certified trainer for AUNAC for the use of artillery and avalanche mitigation. Ken's passions include ski touring with his wife, rock climbing, playing music, and talking snow with Tom Carter. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to watch Ken's really powerful presentation. And his talk's titled, "Why Did I Do That? My Experience with 30 Years of Avalanche Accidents and Near Misses in California and Beyond." Ken, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, Scott. It's been great to be involved with this, with CSAW, listening to all the panelists in the last couple of days, I thought I might have to up my my bio there, but I didn't think Ethan was going to accept my PhD in climate science from Trump University, so that plaque's going to have to stay on my wall. Sorry, Ethan. I'll go ahead and get into share screen mode. Okay, you guys got my screen?
Yep, you're good there.
So here's my buddy Tom Carter, who I really do enjoy talking snow with. And I brought this slide up because I just wanted to tell a little story that he taught me. I met Tom, first he was an educator, and then we became fast friends and climbing partners, and actually worked with him at Ruby Mountain Heli-Ski for a bit. And now he's just a dear friend of mine. And we were on a climb, and I think this relates to avalanches. We were a couple hundred feet from the top on El Cap and low on water. It's getting close to sunset, and I took off leading. I got off route. Things were not going our way. I came down, jammed over to the other crack I was supposed to be on. I'm up, I'm running out of gear. Things aren't going right. And I call down to Tom. I'm like, hey, Tom, man, something's just not right here. And he looks up at me and he's like, Ken, isn't this how we build a problem? And I thought that was great advice. And so we just came down, spent the night again, and reconvened in the morning. So that was a good lesson for me. So when I first started this, this presentation, I thought, well, this won't be so bad. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I've made plenty of mistakes. I'm involved in some accidents and near misses. I thought, well, okay, if people could just learn from my mistakes, that would be great. But as I got more into it, I started thinking, what have I learned from this? What have I gained? What's got me on the right side of the crack in the last 5 years or so? And sort of came up with these thoughts that have really helped me in the industry. Obviously, communication, not just with my team, but communication outside the bubble that I live in. I might call Jamie out to talk about rain, because I know he loves rain up there in that continental climate. Give Grom a call out at Alta and see what's going on with certain types of explosives or whatnot. Trust for me has been huge. Not only just trusting my own instincts on the snow, but trusting my team and backing them up on decisions they might make. I get a radio call from a 2-year patroller who's like, hey, I'm not feeling good about this. I think this area needs to be closed. 100% backup. And of course, education has just been first and foremost. I think all of us realize that education is a lifelong trip. It's not just taking 1 or 2 courses. And I think Katie brought it up with the AAA about required education. I'm a strong believer that if it's required, that the industry should pay for it. So we push pretty hard. And then, of course, collaboration, collaborative thinking, and decision making has really helped me, especially in the last 5 years. And then, of course, culture. There's many different cultures, not only within different ski patrols, but guide services as well. And I think we could take this opportunity to maybe certainly shape culture and change some culture. And then, of course, I want to just throw pressure out to everyone. It's real, it's there, it exists. Where's it coming from? Is it coming from management? Pressure to, get people in the chairlifts? Is it from the public? We've all seen that. People are chomping at the bit to get out there. But importantly, too, I think there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves. And I think through education, we might be able to change some of that. So that's about, I'm hoping that most people watched the presentation I made, and I knew that I wanted to leave lots of time for questions. So think with that, we'll just go into questions.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Ken. I'm gonna get to one real quick, Carl. While we're, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, but in your talk, you said some would say it's part of the job. Not sure it has to be that way when you're referring to coworkers being injured or killed in avalanche accidents. And I think you're acknowledging that while we work in a dangerous environment, we don't necessarily have to have dangerous jobs. So can you kind of expand on your comment on that thought?
Sure. Well, newsflash, it is a dangerous job, and I think it always will be. And I was speaking more about the pressures that we put on ourselves and the culture of getting the job done. I think there's some differences here. When we guide, whether it's mechanized guiding or human powered, or even just having a fun day in the backcountry, we're in the business of avalanche avoidance. Where skiers that have avalanche mitigation programs, we're in the business of causing avalanches, creating avalanches. So while I don't think we could ever eliminate the hazards, I think we could certainly minimize exposure through collaborative decision-making, good education, and the use of racks. I'm a big believer in rack systems. I think it's kind of the way of the future. And but the risk is there. We're in a risky business, and it's not just from avalanches. If you look at workman's comp rates across the board for ski patrols, across the nation, they're pretty high.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. I really enjoyed your presentation. I was actually on the edge of my seat. It was quite funny. And I'm sorry for all your loss, and I really appreciate your sharing to try to shift the culture of sharing what we can learn from our incidents. So kudos to you. We got a live question here from Kelly Millward. Kelly, are you there? Try to unmute your mic there, Kelly. Kelly's gone. Okay, let's go with the live question from Carl Boakland.
Hey, Ken. Thanks for your presentation. Really enjoyed it. It's super powerful. My question is, and several times in your presentation, you said things like, this was the largest avalanche you'd seen on that path or in that area in 20 or 30 years, or maybe that was ever recorded at Alpine Meadows. And so, it wasn't in all the cases, but in some of the cases, it's like these big ones that are creating the surprises. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for people to kind of guard against that, to guard against getting surprised by these surprisingly large avalanches.
Stand way back. I think some of the surprises that we get into, I equate it to the forecast, which we all talk about at length, and then the nowcast, which we actually get when we're out on the snow. And we sometimes get surprised by that, especially with the way that climates are changing, where we might have some warmer temps down low, but still big snows and high winds up high. So I think it's the communication is key when you're out on routes and someone gets surprised, immediately speak up. You just gotta get on the radio and say, I don't care if it's your first day of ski patrol and you're on a route and you see something that's weird or unexpected, getting that information out there right away, I think is key. Does that answer your question, Carl?
Yeah, thanks.
And I think another thing that, and we talked about this a little bit, Ken, was, what is this historic, the whole concept of historic in the ski area world, especially, maybe you have 50, 60 years of data, and in any single slide path that you're looking at, the chances of seeing a big event, call it a 50-year return period event, are only roughly 2/3 in any roughly, or in a 50-year period. So for one path, you're only going to have a 2/3 chance of seeing that really big design avalanche in a 50-year period. And then you have a place like Alpine where you have 100, 200 paths. So you're going to see a lot of things that surprise you that, well, this information from all the grizzled veterans, people like yourself and been around there forever, you know, Murph and other folks, for them to say, no, we've never seen that. Yeah, it means something, but on the scale of time we're looking at, there's a lot that is going to surprise us every year, unfortunately. Kind of a ugly fact of working in a big place like that in that environment.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. We have a question here from Sean Zimmerman Wall. How can we develop a more cohesive avalanche worker culture versus the subsets that exist out there among the different sectors? So acknowledging that individual workplace culture is also important.
Well, I think that comes down to education and collaboration between the industries, you know, and getting people out. I think the exchange programs work great, and I encourage every industry-wide to support that. You know, get people moving around, see what other people are doing, and yeah, you know, we do want to have certain cultures. But there's some cultures that I disagree with, like hazing. Like if you make a mistake, you know, you got to buy beer, or you got to do this, that, or the other thing, as opposed to learning from it. It tends to make people afraid to admit what they did.
That's a great response. We have a question from Josh Hirschberg. Can you describe how your risk tolerance and decision making has ebbed and flowed after the accidents through your career?
Well, it's ebbed and flowed quite a bit. I think anybody that's been in this business for quite some time, you know, my risk tolerance it's pretty low right now. Oh man, yeah, you know, of course, when you're young and you're fired up, you know, things are different. You want to get out there. It's like, okay, we got to get this done. Some of it's cultural driven. I think as we get newer people into the business and some of us guys age out, you know, it's a good chance to change. So I think we all want to come home at the end of the day. That's priority number one, not just as managers, but as you know, frontline people. I mean, that is the goal. We want to have a good time. It's an exciting job. I wouldn't trade it for anything in my life, but we do need to scale back. Definitely the exposure part of it. You know? And I think through just really good collaborative decision making and communication and education, we could achieve those goals. I mean, there's always going to be type A people that want to get out there and get after it. But, you know, when you start coming together as a group and having strong discussions about it and making sure that everyone has a voice, from the first year person to the 30-year veteran, that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So I want to go back to something that you talked about earlier a little bit when you're talking about pressure, and the specific quote you had in talking in the 6 feet deep part of your presentation was how patrollers will have a better me than them attitude, where they'd rather, you know, take the bullet rather than the public to keep terrain open. And, you know, we see this all the time where, especially with experienced professionals, where they're going to take some extra risks, where like in that incident, you were solo ski cutting to try to keep terrain, especially when terrain's already open to the public. It's really hard to close it. So I'm wondering, you know, can you share some thoughts on how workers can combat that? Effectively, it's pride and that desire to keep terrain open to deliver that powder to the people. And how can they avoid taking these unnecessary risks to do that?
Well, that's a great question, Scott. I think it comes down to changing culture again, and mentorship. Mentorship is huge, and giving people a voice and trusting them in their decision making, and then also trying to get ahead of the problem. And so, yeah, that's a tough one. Pride definitely gets in the way. And I think there just needs to be a fundamental shift of that. It's, yeah, this is our job, but, hey, we're not trying to rescue hostages from terrorists here. We're trying to open a ski area. So let's slow down and think about what it is we're actually trying to accomplish here.
Thanks.
Is there any bias training or familiarity biases that are discussed amongst these? Clearly, you guys have a lot of familiarity with your terrain from year to year, and as we all know, we can get complacent. And I just wonder if any of that type of training is included these days in some of the training schemes that Ski Patrol's doing.
Well, yeah, I think, we're looking at biases all the time and a lot of heuristic traps that I think we all fall into. Certainly, a scarcity bias I see this a lot, mostly in the public, of we got to get this powder now because it's going to be gone in half an hour. So we are very proactive with education, and I think, as you get into more of the pro level courses and ISSWs and National Avalanche schools, that's where you're going to learn about those things and then bring them back and talk about them. So yeah, I think we do an okay job of that. However, biases are biases, and heuristic traps are traps. And it'd be great if we could just figure it all out. But it's an ongoing education part. I mean, the advertising company has it dialed, right? I mean, if you try to look at all products, you never get out of the yogurt aisle. So.
All right. Hey, I think we have time for one really quick question here. We're going to go a live question from Jeff Davis. Jeff, you out there? Can you unmute your mic? Calling once. You there, Jeff? Going twice.
Can you hear me now? There it is. Hey, Ken, thanks so much for the presentation. I agree, sharing our accidents and near misses is super important. As an avalanche professional myself, I agree that it's a dangerous job and it comes with some risk. In your opinion, are we taking more risks now than we did in the past? And as an industry, are we working safer, or are we trending in the wrong direction?
Oh, I think we're taking less risks. I certainly am, and my crew is, than we have in the past, for sure. I think the days of cowboying it should and have to be over. We need to look at this collectively. I think the industry is going in the right direction with racks, not only to reduce artillery shots, but we put in 4 racks within the ski area, and those are places, big slide paths that we don't have to put humans in. No human, no problem. So I think the industry is going in the right direction, especially with workshops such as this and National Avalanche School and everything else. So, I mean, my hope is that the days of cowboying it are long gone.
Agreed, 100%. Well, we'd love to keep this going forever. Unfortunately, our time is up. So thanks a ton for an awesome talk and answering some pretty heavy questions, Ken. And anyone can get in touch with Ken on the chat session or the Q&A board if they want to keep speaking with him. Angela?
Great. Thanks again, Ken. Great presentation, and hope everyone gets a chance to check it out. All right. I'm excited to introduce our next presenter, Billy Rankin of the 11 Experience Snowcat operation. And his topic is the evolution of risk management, learning from near misses and accidents. And Billy, I've known for years. He's based in Crested Butte, Colorado, and is one of 11's lead guides and former snow safety director and risk manager. Billy's been an outdoor professional since he arrived on the scene in Crested Butte in 1992 and is focused on guiding and education. Billy started out with Outward Bound in 1994 and has led mountaineering, river, sea kayaking, and canyon courses throughout Colorado, Utah, Alaska, and Mexico. He was a forecaster for the Crested Butte Avalanche Center for 10 years and also worked on worked 10 years on Crested Butte's Pro Ski Patrol. He worked as a snowcat ski guide for Irwin Lodge long before it was operated by 11. And Billy's also a wilderness EMT and teaches for Knowles Wilderness Medicine programs. During the off seasons, he's off playing in the Elk Mountains with his wife and son, boating the Grand Canyon, or traveling the globe. Billy, come on in and enlighten us.
All right. Thanks so much. What a pleasure. Hopefully you got a chance to see my pre-recorded video. If not, check that out. But I would like to just to do a little wrap up and highlight of my presentation and hope for some fruitful discussions or questions. So I think my big take home for today would be that any risk management plan or program looks to be fluid and ever evolving and never static. Hopefully we're all aiming to improve our personal practices and operational practices throughout the years. I think that's a really important piece. To look at a few details of the accident I highlighted, not to review the whole accident, but this is a big ride I took on a ski cut. And first I want to talk about the avalanche problem of wind slab. I think in Colorado and many of us who work in continental snow climates, we're so used to that persistent slab being at the top of our list and such a hard problem to manage that wind slab often falls into the manageable, easier to manage column, which in contrast to persistent slab, it definitely is, but I think we often underestimate the potential hazard and risk dealing with these wind slabs. And I think with good telemetry and terrain knowledge, we know where the wind slabs form in our terrain. I think it's much harder to know what their sensitivity and or their size or depth will be. And that's a hard one, I think, to forecast. So ski cutting, I said it in my presentation, I'll say it again, a lot of great dialogue and even research has come out the last few years. And I think every operation needs to kind of keep reviewing and training on ski cutting. It's a great technique and super appropriate sometimes, and I think very inappropriate other times. I'm really glad to hear that risk tolerance came up in the last talk, and that's something I think about a fair bit with ski cutting. How we have different personal risk tolerances, especially with ski cutting, and maybe how operations have an operational risk tolerance, and that's something I go back and forth on with this personal versus operational risk tolerance, but there's a whole talk right there. Weather factors with visibility, that's a big one. And from this incident, I really learned that even given a snowpack and avalanche problem, if I have poor visibility due to a storm or fog layer or just flat light, how to build some a little bigger safety net or room for mistakes, margin for error into my risk management plan for the day, because this is a big contributing factor this day. With good visibility, I think this accident would have been avoided. So that's a big one for me these days, is visibility. And then finally, listening to your partner. That's probably my biggest take home on this, how to work with your partners. And from this, I've definitely developed better communication techniques, better listening skills. I tend to pride myself in being a good communicator and think all of us, or many of us, need to improve our listening skills and listening to our partners and not just speaking one way. So with that said, a couple big picture wrap up points of how to learn and evolve from near misses and accidents and evolve our program. A couple bullets. I think really important to create a culture of humility and honesty. Overall, we need skilled guides with experience, but over the years, I've learned the importance of honesty and being humble. I think this is challenging for young guides and professionals. We're right from the get-go, we're taught to form opinions and be confident and start answering questions or asking the right questions. So as a young professional, we have to be confident, but how do you be confident and humble in the same breath? I think that's important for any of you educators out there or supervisors or mentors. Teaching confidence and also humility in the same breath is something of really importance. Develop a system to allow open communication. this is kind of a pretty simple statement, and I think we all agree the importance of this, but how do we actually develop this system? I like that Ken brought up the factor of pressure always being present, and I also think time constraints are a really huge one, even recreationally, especially professionally. We can't sit there and just talk all day about it. Some days we can, maybe with no guests. Some of our best days are days with no guests where we could sit and drink coffee and shoot the shit and talk. But we have to figure out how to allow this open communication within a time frame. Maybe we have 5 or 10 minutes, and are we actually allowing the team to communicate and hearing from everyone on a morning meeting? That's key. Create time for debriefing and feedback. Again, debriefing has been a big topic forever, but especially in the last several years at these conferences. And, I'll be the first to admit there's days we don't debrief. We high five and say, great day, let's get out of here. Day's long enough. Let's get back to our families, get some sleep. We'll be back here in the morning. I think the days with incidents or accidents or near misses, we definitely feel the need to debrief and do pretty well, but I think it's important to really try to incorporate it more regularly into our operation and, figure out your favorite debrief questions. We use a lot of the classics. I'm sure many of you do, of where were we at highest risk today or our greatest exposure? If we could redo today, what would we do differently today? And hey, were we just lucky today, or did we actually do good? Those are some of my favorites, and I think creating a better framework for debriefing is always good. And again, adjust the process and plans accordingly. With all the bullets above, it's great to create this culture and allow for communication, debriefing, and feedback. But at the end of the day, to really finish the loop, I think we need to really look at our process and adjust the plans. And when I look at that, I think about workflow. How do we adjust our workflow accordingly? From a morning meeting to documentation standards, but try to be more strategic with our workflow, and that changes sometimes year to year. Roles are a big one. I think really taking a critical look at who does what in the mornings. Are there real specific roles for the different players? Are there overlapping roles day to day, week to week? I think that's really important, and we've learned a lot of changing our roles throughout the time, or throughout year to year. And then another part of that is, finally decision making, and how finally we make decisions. I think that's the crux of the matter, is with decision making, and who makes the decisions.
Whoop, I'm sorry. Hey, Billy, I think the questions are going to start really stacking up, and we have about 10 minutes left. So maybe if you can wrap it up and we can start moving into some questions from the audience.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely don't want to miss the question. So, so I will say, just to wrap it up, I think continually looking at our operations recreationally and professionally, and seeing how we can improve them. So yeah, psyched for questions and some discussion. So thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
Great, Billy. Thanks so much for that. My first question, how has the ski cutting incident changed your criteria for train management, especially in regards to ski cutting, and how do you train new guides coming in who don't have ski patrol backgrounds or extensive ski cutting experience?
Great question. For me personally, with ski cutting, I've definitely I've lowered my risk tolerance with ski cutting, and I'm less willing to throw that big ski cut in a slope I did 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And especially with an explosives program, I'll go make the shots up these days and use the shots we have. And there's a time and place. Teaching, it's a tough one. I think number one thing is to say, this is nothing easy. This is a lifelong process, and never to get complacent with it, and that every day is different. We try to teach that there's certain terrain that is probably never appropriate for a ski cut, and really train application and how to understand your terrain and your start zones. And then even getting into your little pockety terrain where the terrain's appropriate, what days within that terrain are appropriate or not. how deep is the slab, what is the weak layer, what is the propagation potential, and then to learn how to identify consequence of it gone wrong. What if? So I think that's some of the bullets there, but ongoing discussions from day to day, not getting complacent with it, and always different.
Cool, thanks, Bill. Hey, we have a live question from Don Sheriff. Big Don, can you unmute your mic?
Hey there, Billy. Thanks for the talk. Nice job. One thing that came out, or that I thought about when you're coming with your take-homes, was team selection, and beyond just roles, but based on personalities. So towards the end of my time in Alaska, I started choosing partners who would not be afraid to call me out on poor decisions, and started choosing co-guides or teams working together based on their ability to mentor, but also to call each other out. Did you do that at all at Irwin?
Absolutely. Inevitably, there's always a level of hierarchy of managers and more and less experienced people. And it's easy just to tell someone, younger or less experienced, say, hey, let me know if something's uncomfortable, but hey, follow me. But I think to actually give that opportunity, not just in a morning meeting, but following through with your route partner one-on-one, doing it inside, maybe with the terrain map pulled up, reviewing a plan, and then doing it again on slope. Okay, here we are on top of the slope. How are we feeling now? And that constantly look at giving that opportunity to communicate amongst partners. And even though going on routes, having a leader and maybe a follower, but giving that opportunity. So I think we definitely look at our partners, and we try to be strategic on a certain day of who we're using on a route, and how to utilize strengths and skills within a day and within our team. And then, that communication, that dialogue may look or feel differently every day, but trying to at very least give the opportunity for that communication and that listening to occur. So I think that's a really big part of it, because that's really the crux of it, is who you're with and how you're approaching that slope that day. So thanks, Don.
We have a question, follow up with Ron, talking about communication is all good, but how do you actually encourage free communication within your daily routine?
At some point, and there's been days we don't do this, but I'd say on most days, we open it up to the guides, and we have a small enough team where, we're looking 3, 4, maybe 6, 7 guides at most, where, on a ski patrol meeting with 30 people, you're not going to say, oh, let's all go around and, hear what we have to say. But we have a small enough team where at some point open it up and say, hey, what do you have to say? Who's got something to say today? And if someone's been very quiet during a morning meeting, we may ask, hey, put someone on the spot a little bit, put a younger guide or an older guide, whoever, on the spot and say, hey, you've been kind of quiet today. What's on your mind? Hey, someone asked that hard question. We may even select a devil's advocate today. Hey, someone poke holes in the plan today. What are we missing? Ask those kind of classic questions. And, sometimes you have the luxury of allowing long time of that dialogue. Sometimes it's kind of quick and rushed, but we try to allow it every day, ideally at some level.
Yeah, great.
Awesome, thanks, Billy. So hey, I have a kind of a similar thing. We're gonna, try to get at some real world tricks that you've discovered or that you use. So operational avalanche professionals, you're dealing with the same terrain day in, day out, and you develop this, really strong familiarity with the terrain, which can lead to complacency and a little bit of comfort, because our brains we're just hardwired that way, that something we recognize and are very familiar with, we see as being good. So it's really hard to overcome that bias. I guess, how do you attempt to combat this with yourself and your staff? So 1, during training, 2, say during your guide meetings or daily briefings, and then 3, on like a personal real-time basis. How do you fight that complacency that comes with familiarity?
It's a great question. And I think to start is the process, our avalanche forecasting process, and how we formulate our plan for the day. The workflow is such that we really look at each day as a unique day. Obviously the terrain is that the one constant and the one we get familiar with, but look at every day uniquely and say what's appropriate today and how do we approach that terrain today. Obviously, we look for those big red flag factors, those ones that try to identify those exceptional days that, okay, we haven't seen this, or the winds totally blowing from 180 degrees different, or we've never seen this, type of density or this weak layer. So really try to identify those unique days that are kind of off the normal radar, and then really know that this could be a day to approach things very differently. So yeah, and once we're on slope, realize that when we're on top of that slope, even though we've been there 100 times, today's today, and it may need a different interaction than it did the day before. It may need to just be left alone. Hey, today's not the day to go there at all. Today is the day to go there, but we got to approach it like this. And depending again on your partners, the situation, the snowpack, there's so many factors that go into it, but we try to, that morning process and that workflow is such that hopefully identifies all those pieces that really lead to a good operational plan for the day. So it's a unique solution to the day, and not just a prepackaged solution that's for wind sled. We always do this. We always throw the shot there. We mix up our routes. We don't really use shot placements or numbered placements. We try to mix our shot placements. We try to approach it differently per the day to keep us on our toes. So.
Hey, Billy, I've got a bit of a follow-up question. We're shortly running out of time here, but with your use of the run list, as we all know, the yellow category is often controversial, and it's kind of all across the board how it's used. And I wonder how you, once you've identified your uncertainties in a run that you've tagged as yellow, how does that become an open run that day in terms of like your communication? Does everybody have to be involved in the decision, or is it the guide that's done the assessment makes the call? How's that work?
Great question. And of course, we've scrutinized ourselves and have gotten a lot of questions from outside professionals about the use of yellow. The days we are using that, most days we do have a snow safety team who is dedicated to looking at the evaluate slopes of the yellow slopes for the day. So they're usually the ones who are getting the first eyes on it. And once they're on, we try to really say, hey, what is it going to take today to go from yellow to green? Not just like it's yellow, cool, let's try to get to green. We try to, what is it going to take? Is it actually shots? Is it a test slope that we could test the most suspect slope and then open a whole zone from one? Is it hey, no, today is a run by run. Every run needs to be looked at. And these are the criteria that we need to see to go to open. Usually it's our snow safety team, or usually our forecaster for the day is on that snow safety team. And usually they'll give some obs over a radio, and we can do it over a radio call. But we do say, hey, I'd like to see this go. We're okay. Usually the snow safety team communicates, we're okay for this to go from evaluate to open. And then the guide team has a chance to say, hey, from what we're seeing as well, we agree with that. So we try to create, it's usually led by our snow safety team and forecaster, but we try to create that opportunity for consensus, because maybe the guide team is on a different slope and see something that would contradict that. So we try to strive for that consensus among the team, and then over communicate it. And our dispatcher now is marking that on our run list to document that we moved it over. And so it's pretty well received and consensus based for the most part, led by our snow safety team. But not a no-brainer, and definitely an important part of that system is really hitting on the details within that.
Yep. Super. Thanks, Billy. This was an excellent presentation, and I really appreciate you sharing kind of the inside Snook net operational kind of processes that you're using, and I'm familiar with that and think it's a gem. And you didn't mention how long the snowmobile ride is for the guides and forecasters to get to their screens into the Irwin Lodge to start their day. But it's pretty impressive endeavor being a lead guide. For a guide in your terrain is pretty awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Billy. I think we'll wrap it up unless, Scott, you've got anything else?
No, thanks, Billy. And people can go visit the Q&A if they have some more questions for him, or get in touch with him. We could talk for a long time about some of what Billy was getting at there.
Yeah, thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Billy.
All right. So our Our final speaker, it's a true honor to be able to introduce our final speaker, Dr. Robert de Boer. Robert was trained as an aerospace engineer at Delft University, and Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. After 20 years experience in line management and consulting, he changed careers to pursue his scientific interest in team collaboration and safety, culminating in a PhD in 2012 at the Delft University of Technology. From 2009 to 2018, Robert was a professor of aviation engineering at the Amsterdam University of Applied Science, researching safety and leadership, human factors, and restorative practice across many industries. Robert has worked on improving safety for international airlines, energy and healthcare companies, railway and road operations, and the Dutch Armed Forces. Robert is currently the director of the Amsterdam campus for Northumbria University and also serves as an associate at Intergo, the International Center for Safety, Ergonomics, and Human Factor, also in the Netherlands. He's published in a book with a foreword by colleague Sydney Decker this fall titled Safety Leadership, a Different, Doable, and Directed Approach to Operational Improvements. We're so fortunate to have a safety expert from outside the avalanche industry join us today. It's always incredibly valuable. Robert's presentation is titled Learning from Incidents, Lessons Learned from Aviation, and I'm really excited to see where this discussion leads. With that, please take it away, Robert.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Scott. That's great. Yeah, it must be the flattest country on earth where I'm presenting from, back here in the Netherlands. But I'm hopefully going to be able to contribute somewhat to your workshop in a positive way. I'd like to start off with just grabbing back to what Ken was saying just a bit earlier about this being a dangerous profession. In preparation for my talk, I did look into the figures, and as you may know, there have been 59 avalanche-related deaths in the US since 1950. And I've taken an easy stab at it with 2,025 members of the AAA. That makes for just under a death per year on average. We can express deaths in micromorts, that's 1 per million events or members or whatever. And so this leads to a danger level of about 1 micromort per day for your kind of work. But because everything's concentrated in the winter months, of course, it's essentially 2.5 micromorts. That is a level of safety that is what aviation had in the 1959. I looked it up just now. And so that's where we've come from, and now we're at a level of between 40 and 200 times safer, depending on which figures you take. 3 micromorts per day, which is a threshold which the WHO has set, the World Health Organization, as being just about tolerable risk for any substantial category of workers. And of course, you know that many recreational activities like skydiving, scuba diving, and bungee jumping have a similar fatality or even a higher fatality rate than you, but you're doing this for your job and not for fun also, I hope. So that's a big difference with aviation, and we've come a long way since the 1960s. And how did we do that? Well, we did that by creating the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and that was started in 1944 during the Second World War over in Montreal. Its house, the convention was in Chicago, but they're now in Montreal. And in 1951, they adopted an Annex 13, which is all about incident investigation. And that was desperately needed because the aviation industry, right from the start, considered itself as a system, not as a group of individuals or as an individual enterprise, but they realized that it was a team effort between, of course, the airlines, the pilots, the ground service people, the airports, the air traffic controllers or navigation providers, the manufacturers, the designers. All these different entities, all these different stakeholders have a stake to play. And if something goes wrong, we need to understand from this whole system view what it was that is up for improvement. I don't even say fail because it's a learning process, it's a long process, but we do need to learn from adverse events. It's a waste of life and money if we don't learn from them. And so that leads me to the summary, of course, of my presentation. The first step is to learn from incidents, to get the technical facts, understand why it made sense to the people that were involved in the case, draw conclusions and generate recommendations, and disseminate the learnings. But you could say, in a certain sense, that that's only the start, because we can disseminate learnings, but if nobody does anything with them, we are not avoiding future accidents. So we need to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's by training or teaching people about the basis of the sort of incidents that can happen. And one incident can generate lots of learnings, but it might be multiple incidents that are necessary before we really understand what's happening. And the current the 737 MAX case is one to point. There were 2 accidents needed before we actually properly delved into the case. So that's training. The second is to coach, and that, by coaching I mean mentoring on the job. People can be educated, but they might not still have the competences to apply the new processes on the job. And the third is very important, we'll get back to that, is to challenge people in practice, in the operation, who don't abide by the new best practices or the things that we've learned. They need to be challenged actively. We don't only need adverse events to learn from, we can also learn from routine work. And we know that's proactive safety, or also known as safety 2. But for that, we need to have the data. So we really need to consistently report near misses. We now understand these as well, building our collective wisdom. And of course, an avalanche, whether someone is taken with it and gone for a ride, a new word I learned today, or whether there's no damage at all. In both cases, we need to understand whether we were able to forecast that properly. So we need to understand why things go well as well. There's this famous saying that if you want to understand how a marriage can last for a long time, you don't go away and study divorces. And so the same thing is in safety. We need to also understand why things go as we think they should go, and how we can improve our forecasts, for instance. We need to innovate, but we need to do that under controlled circumstances, because innovations imply that we're doing something new. And then, I'm sorry to say, we need to create rules or best practices if we're successful. And the reason I say sorry is because that means that a lot of the autonomy that is currently vivid in the talks that we had only just now from Ken and Billy and others, and even in Anne's talk earlier about the public, that autonomy, that independence, if we really value safety, we may need to give some of that up in the interest of safety. That's a choice. Okay, I think I'll leave it with that for the moment. Is my screen still shared? No, it's not, is it? Was not.
Yep, you're fine now. It's not shared anymore, Robert.
Good.
Awesome. Well, hey, I think the first question I'm going to pose is kind of dive into that, what makes a good marriage, not a good divorce, a little bit more. So, you know, on your bullet point, you said understand why things go well. So how have you researched this or seen it studied successfully in the past? It's not an easy thing to do.
Well, sometimes we do it without knowing it. If we have a I worked for the Fokker Aircraft Company, and we made new aerostructures, parts of aircraft, which had to withstand certain pressures and duration. And of course, we had mathematical models, physical models of physics, not physical models, but mathematical models of how long these components could last. And then once we'd done these calculations, we got test pieces out and we got them manufactured. And we then put them in the test bench, and we fatigued them. We put them under stress repeatedly for months and months on end to see whether the calculations that we'd made previously were right. And if it was, then that would give us the confidence that the mathematical models that we had were also valid for other applications, similar sort of applications. So that's one way of going about, which that's not new. That's something that's being done all the time. In the safety domain, we tend to focus on the bad sides, but in your world, the things that we heard in the earlier presentation about whether forecasters were changing their mind or not, that was yesterday, one of the presentations, before they were able to test the snow and afterwards. That would be a brilliant exercise to see how we can increase forecaster accuracy by also getting the forecast, well, naturally looking at the forecasts that they get right, as much as looking at the forecasts that they get wrong, and understanding and learning what makes one forecaster a little bit better than the other forecaster, and then transferring that knowledge.
Yeah, thanks. I have a follow-up to that that's really similar. So in the Avalanche outdoor environment, it's a really poor feedback environment. We don't get immediate or unambiguous feedback a lot of the time. And you can get away with doing almost everything wrong. I think you nailed it at the end of the day, even though you might have been just one small step away from, total disaster. And I'd venture a lot of the work you've done, whether it's, with the military aviation, transportation, it's similar, environmental challenges. So I'm wondering if you're looking at what went right, how do you kind of get rid of that noise of the many different things that went wrong, whether it's poor decisions or techniques, but went unpunished? So how do you call those out when you're looking at what went right on a good outcome?
Yeah, so what we're looking for are so-called leading indicators of safety. So things which point to safety even before the adverse event could occur if it were to occur. And that's a challenge in itself. But what we find in many industries that there are indicators which tell us something about the risks that we're running, even before we're into the dire circumstances themselves. And what I would and that's not an overnight thing. That's something which collectively needs to be created by the avalanche industry. It has components of technology in it. There's components of more research in it. It has certainly the components of data, much more data in it than you currently probably have. There's some competences and there's stakeholders. And with that group of aspects that I'm mentioning a systems approach or holistic approach, which differs a little bit from the current attitude, which I sense from some of the presentations, which is much more focused on local, individual and teamwork. That's important as well, of course it is, and Ken and Billy and others have stressed that. But we also, I take encouragement from the many technological presentations that were also given in this workshop in these 3 days, which allow you better than in the past to understand snow and its dynamics, and therefore help you in your quest to keep people safe.
Great, thanks, Robert.
Great, thanks, Robert. I really enjoyed your presentation, and thank you for bringing an outside perspective from, and clearly an industry that has a lot of risk management concerns. I'm curious on the case of the runway taxiway confusion in Amsterdam, where you said that the air traffic control wasn't monitoring the aircraft that took off on taxiway Alpha. And we've adopted a lot from crew resource management. And now I'm wondering if that only takes place in the cockpit, or what was the check what was the miss there?
It's a really interesting one. First place, crew resource management is adhered to much more stringently in the cockpit than elsewhere. And in the cockpit or around the cockpit, we have a number of measures like simulator tests and also line observations, which make that the pilots are completely drilled in proper crew resource management skills. So that's a caveat. That's not true. I was going to say we wouldn't expect an incident based on poor crew resource management, but then not all airlines, I'm talking about Western Airlines, I guess here, we have seen some weaker performance elsewhere. But getting back to ATC, they are less trained, but still they have, of course, their social skills, and they are tested on that as well. But the question here is much more, why did it make sense to him? And that's a question which I really want to put central in this case. And the air traffic controller, as far as we've been able to find back there, it made sense for the air traffic controller to let go, if you like, of the aircraft, not monitor him anymore, for two reasons. It was a very busy evening, so there was production pressure, and it was something which they found to be acceptable. And in this case, they is the colleague air traffic controllers. So this challenge I talked about before wasn't in place for this particular action. And we wouldn't probably have highlighted or known about it if we hadn't investigated this near miss. And when I say we, it's the Air Traffic Investigation Board, of course, here in the Netherlands, Dutch Safety Board. But you see how important it is, even in this near miss, when nothing happened really. They got to Warsaw safely, despite taking off from the taxiway. But looking back how this could have occurred. These are the sort of highlights that you see, and then you need to discuss amongst yourselves whether that is acceptable behavior or not.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Hey, in some of your previous work that I was looking through, you note the can-do mentality of the Dutch military. So that
not just the Dutch military, any military, Scott. the U.S. Navy as a role to play in that as well. Yeah,
I'm sure they do.
Your question.
So you see that exact same mentality. It's really common with ski patrollers in the United States and North America. So I'm curious if you can share some advice for both the workers who have that can-do mentality and those who manage them. How can you reduce the chances of that
as
causing
if there's
problems?
a distinction. It's not an. It's a. I hesitate always to use the word culture, but it is an attitude or a culture that is shared amongst several people. No individual. Well, it's more difficult for an individual to have a can-do mentality when the environment around him, his partners, his bosses, his supervisors, do not. What we tend to find in the Dutch military, and it's also been documented for the US Navy, that's why I mention it, some of the Pacific Ocean accidents were due to that. Just get the mission done, no matter what. That is an organization-wide issue where the resources are not matching the goals that have been set, and there's this urge for the pride of the organization, for the visibility of the organization, to still get the job done. And yes, it could also be in your environment. Ken alluded to guys who are only talking about opening up ski areas or not. I mean, no one's going to die, I was going to say, if we don't open it in time. And I think that's a fair comment. So where's the pressure coming from? And so if collectively there's a pride in getting the ski areas open as quickly as possible, and that instills risks, then of course that can-do mentality can lead to accidents. The interesting thing, though, within the military is that it's a highly regulated domain. So there are many rules and procedures which are valid, which then when we look in detail, they know them, but they know they cannot adhere to them, comply with them, because the resources are lacking. Lack of time, lack of money, lack of tools, lack of materials, lack of resources in the US Navy case, as in too few people. And so under those circumstances, and still fulfilling the mission goals, that leads to a can-do mentality. In the case of your industry, I'm afraid there might not be enough, between quotation marks, rules and best practices for you to adhere to. So that the situation is a little bit different. I'd like you to consider whether it's possible to share some of the best practices that have even been presented today in these 3 days, and make people feel that they are advancing the industry by complying to them more than they have in the past.
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to another time explore that further with you, the rules. We're going to run out of time here. Angela?
Yep.
Yeah, we've got a question from Blaze Reardon. Not much time for an answer here, but what makes for an effective case studies? And we use those a lot in the professional and recreational snow workers regularly. And
yep.
What do you think makes for an effective case study?
Well, the case study is subservient to the goals of the learning that is being transmitted. And what we know, so once we've got those goals ready and we know the skills or the competences that we want to build, then the case study should serve that purpose. And particularly what we want to do is get people some theoretical underpinning, but then practice and experience that in their own, on their own, to get the sense of it. And so that often means to throw them into the deep and to either put them in a controlled circumstances in the physical world, or in a simulated environment, or desktop type simulation, but that's the least realistic, of course, to then get them to practice, to experience the theory that we've tried to convey to them. And what we've found is that the fidelity of the simulation doesn't even need to be super high. We can simulate a lot of things. Aviation, of course, works with simulators all the time. We have so-called moving simulators, simulators which have degrees of freedom in which you feel as if you are accelerating or going through a corner or taking off. But the fixed base simulators, the ones that are only give you the perception of sight, work nearly as effectively. So you don't need that vestibular organ to be stimulated in the tactile environment still to be able to learn a lot about what you need to do in certain circumstances. And perhaps the same thing can be created for your world, that you create a simulated environment or a controlled environment in which people can practice their skills.
And do you think that would be effective by, using just online tools and photos and asking people about their decision making, or it needs to be more engaged?
No, the people cannot often recall truthfully what their decision path was. So if you ask them, they'll make something up. And unconsciously, not maliciously, but
if it was like a quiz where it was tracked what their decision making process was down the line.
Yeah, but the skills that we probably want is for them to do a ski run and still be safe, and that doesn't lend itself to online very easily. So that's recognizing certain aspects of a slope from sight. Yes, that might work the way that you say it. So you've got to first define your goals, and then you can create the simulation environment with it.
Great. I'm going to sneak in one more little question, if you don't mind, Scotty. That fuselage that you found in Greenland, like what equipment did you use to find that?
I had to look that up, and I did. It's called Snow Tem. And I'm not sure I said it in the presentation, but it was actually 21 months after the accident that they were able to find the fan hub and the blades. And that shows you to what length the aviation industry feels it is compelled to go to identify what it was that went wrong. This particular uncontained engine explosion, we thought it was the fan hub, but we weren't quite sure, and we didn't have the thing. And so there was already a service bulletin out to get extra inspections on that part of the engine, but we needed to have it to be sure. And so 21 months later, and several expeditions later, we were able to find it 4 meters under the Greenland snow. Yeah, that's what it takes. That makes flying expensive in times, but yeah, we believe it's worth it.
Great, thank you.
It's really interesting, Robert. I hope that our industry has the same drive to investigate, that both the means and the drive to investigate the near misses going forward.
Yeah, I think you need to get more people covered simultaneously in snow, because of course any fatality, it's never a single fatality in commercial aviation. It's always a couple of hundred people, and that does seem to have an impact as well, I'm afraid. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure hearing your, a very different perspective from what we're used to, and I hope I'll be able to carry on this conversation with you in the future going forward.
You're coming over, I understand. So looking forward to it.
At some point, I'll be back. Well, bedankt. Thank you, Robert. So with that, it's time for us to wrap up the session. Thanks to all the presenters. There were some really interesting talks there. I think what struck me was a kind of a great mix of theory and practice, almost ISSW style, just seeing these discussions about decision-making and safety at different scales, from individual, from Ken's talk to the operation, from Billy's talk, and Anne kind of hitting on the public side of things and her operation. And then finally culminating there with Robert's talk about how, almost industry oversight research would approach this problem. So Angela, do you have anything to add there before we sign off?
Yeah, just a great workshop all around. I really appreciate the international flavor and all the expertise and inquisitiveness that everyone's brings to the table. And I want to point out Ken's comment from what Tom Carter yelled up at him. Isn't this how we build a problem? And I think that's a good note to end it on as we go into our early season Avalanche problems and to just get our head in the game. And I wish everyone a safe season, and thanks for participating in CSAW. Ian?
Back to you, Ethan.
All right. Thanks, Scotty. Thanks, Angela. Great job moderating that session. And yeah, really strong finish to a great 3 days. Thanks to all the speakers. I agree with what Scotty's perspective on that session. There were some really interesting topics, and Robert's contribution at the end was it was really interesting for me to listen to how he had absorbed so much of the information from the last 3 days and other work that we have out there, and give us some advice on his work and the work from the aviation industry, which has a really different scale of resources to what we're all doing. So thank you all so much for participating in that. We've reached the end of day 3. I'd like to hand the mic over to Carl Boakland from the Forest Service National Avalanche Center to give us some words about this year's CSAW. Take it away, Carl.
Hey, thanks, Ethan. I just wanted to just real briefly say thank you to, first of all, the folks at the CAIC and the Friends of the CAIC for running all of the behind the scenes technology here. It worked fantastically well from my perspective. We had people from all over the world chiming in on discussions and whatnot, and it was really great. And you guys did a fantastic job. And I'd like to thank all the participants in CSAW. The moderators did a great job running the presentations. The speakers were awesome. And all of you participating and providing questions and discussions. So yeah, a real big kudos out to everyone. And a big thank you from the National Avalanche Center. And I'd just like to say, everyone, have a great and a safe winter, and hope to see you around on the slope sometime. And now I'll pass it back to Ethan.
Great, thanks, Carl. Yeah, I'll just back up what Carl said. I couldn't say it better myself, so I won't try to repeat it. But yeah, so great to have everybody involved in this, and hope you enjoyed it, and really appreciate everybody's involvement. I do want to thank a couple of people individually. Carl Boakland, who put a huge amount of work into this, drumming up speakers and helping us coordinate things. Jason Koenigsberg and Ron Simonois from the CAIC also spent a lot of time over the last 4 months putting time into this, and their attention to detail really helped us present this program to you in the way that we did, which I think was quite good. Aaron Carlson and Brian Rodin from the Friends of the CAAC, who did a huge amount of work on the technical and organizational aspects of this. Couldn't have done it without you guys. So thanks everybody for all the hard work. There's a bunch of other people at the CAAC that contributed. Brian Lazar, Spencer Logan, Mike Cooperstein, so thanks to all of you guys as well. On that note, we will call this a workshop. Send us comments if you have ideas about things we could do better in the future, or if you need contacts to some of the speakers or moderators. We're happy to help you out with some of that stuff. We'll get today's recording up on the website next week, and that stuff will be up there. Both the pre-recorded talks and the live sessions, the recordings of those will be up for about a month. Thank you so much for participating in this. We really couldn't have done it without all of you and all the participation that we got from the audience. I hope that you're all looking forward to a great winter, and please stay safe out there and reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you. Thanks again, and have a great weekend.